Meeting for the Fairfield Board of Finance. Everyone, please rise. We're going to ask Mr. Mottola to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance tonight.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, good evening, everyone. Tonight's agenda, this is our normal quarterly agenda, and typically on a quarterly agenda, we don't have voting items. We do have a couple of holdover items due to the length of our last meeting, which we will vote on tonight. The first item is to hear, consider, and adopt bond resolutions appropriating funds for costs of certain non-recurring capital projects and the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation. The second is to hear an update on a bond refinancing from the Chief Fiscal Officer. The third is to review the current status of the town's pension and OPEB funds. Fourth is to review the Board of Education financial position. Fifth is to review the second quarter town's financial position. Sixth is a brief update on the Fairfield Ludlow High School Building Committee by the First Selectman. And seventh is to hear, consider, and act upon a request from the Chief Fiscal Officer to transfer $245,000 from contingency to various accounts. There's an attached schedule, and it relates to a contract settlement. Now, I might ask that we take one of these items out of order since we do have bond counsel here tonight. So I might move item number 6 up behind item number 2 on the agenda. So it would go 1, 2, 6, 3, 4, 5, 7. New members, first quarterly review meeting. No questions are out of bounds or off balance. What we do is quarterly we review the financial position of the town. We do get an updated report from the Board of Education before the meeting. We'll feel free to ask questions about that. And then Mr. Mayor will walk us through any items that we should be aware of as regards the town for this point of the year versus what our budgeted expectations were on both revenue and expenses. We'll also hear from the pension board as to what's going on with the investments in those accounts and how they're tracking towards their policies and towards their expectations. So who's representing the pension boards tonight? Is Mr. Vahey or Mr. Brockveld? Brian Vahey. Okay. So with that, any questions, comments from board members before we start? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go to the first item, which is the holdover item, one of the holdover items. To hear, consider, and adopt bond resolutions appropriating funds for the costs of certain non-recurring capital projects and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriations. We have 3 bonding resolutions before us. I'll ask for a motion to put them all before us, and we'll vote on them individually. Do I have a motion? Mr. Brown, seconded by Mr. Stone. The items are now before us. I'll turn them over to board members for any questions on any of the 3 bond resolutions right now, and we'll move forward from there. Any order you would like, Mrs. Leclerc.
Sure. I guess it's a question for bond counsel.
Mr. Clary, please come on up from Pullman Connolly. Thank you for being here tonight, sir.
And I guess it's on the revised resolution that's before us tonight for the $5,236,342. And I guess last week when it came before us, it didn't include the boiler. And I guess for future reference, we want to know if we can increase or change the amount of the resolution or the amount of funds that we can approve.
Okay. Then I'll start out with this resolution and the history of the non-recurrent capital expenditures, which over the years the resolution has evolved. Originally, it started out with a lump sum for a number of listed projects with no specific allocation.
It's going to confuse it.
And with input from the board, it was decided that you wanted better control over the allocation of those funds. And so we made each item, a discrete authorization. So it's like bringing up the way I analyzed it was treating it as a whole new issue. It didn't relate to any of the others. And since it wasn't anything related to that, was before the Board of Finance, I did not feel that you had the power to add that as a whole new item.
Okay, so if we wanted to, like, if there was one specific amount that we wanted to increase the amount to, we could increase it or decrease it? Like, if we take, like, the main library HVAC, we could adjust that amount up or down?
Historically, I'm aware of relatively few times where things have been increased. And most of the times, those have involved major school projects. And the rules on bonding for them are different than bonding on most other projects. And ultimately, the decision there, the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance are truly just recommending to the RTM in that case. So that RTM has the right to, is really the sole right to make the determination.
Okay, but as a board, don't we have the authority to increase or decrease an amount in the, it's like when we appropriate money, we're actually given the town authorization to spend money.
Right.
And so, like in the budget process, we can increase, decrease, or transfer. And I was pretty comfortable that that carried across to everything that we approved.
Well, there's really little guidance to support on the bonding things. The town has treated them consistently in this way, sort of limiting when you wanted to add. I think it followed a course somewhat similar to what has happened here. You objected and you wanted an item added. You have a great deal of authority by just not taking action and asking the Board of Selectmen to reconsider their decision. And generally, that's how things have been resolved.
No, it isn't.
No?
No, absolutely not. We've added. In fact, for Fairfield Woods Middle School, we added millions of dollars of appropriation.
That's a major school project.
So,
That special rule, there are,
okay, but you said, your answer was, number one, you said, I felt. So what is the law, not what you felt? What is the law, number one? What's the statute? What's the charter say? Number two, okay, for the major school projects, right?
right.
You mentioned, well, really what we do is recommend to the RTM, right?
You don't even have to, you don't have to recommend either.
Quite frankly, we recommend, that's all we ever do to the RTM, including for the budget, as we
I
recommend.
should
correct?
have said, you don't even have, if you don't, they don't need any guidance from you. They can act on their own.
And I thought we could too, right? To add, we've routinely added to appropriations where we've acted on our own. Every year.
No,
The
you're
budget
talking about
process.
the budget process, not the bonding process.
So historically in the bonding process, the way this has worked is it's gone from the Board of Selectmen to the Board of Finance.
Right.
And we have added to the bonding, I've been here for 10 years, we've added to the bonding process in those 10 years. Are you saying that we've done it wrong for the last 10 years? And before?
I'm just trying to remember situations where you've done that, and the only ones I could come up with were ones involving major school projects.
So we can add millions of dollars in that situation, but we can't add hundreds of thousands here. How about Jennings School? Isn't it a school project?
A major school project. I mean,
Define major.
the major is the state reimbursing us? Do we have a building committee? I would think it sort of goes along with larger projects.
Mr. Mottola, you had a question? Thank you.
So just so I understand, I'm new here. I'm going to give you an example on the bonding resolution, the $5 million and change. We have a main library HVAC, $250,000. So if I'm understanding you correctly, if during our discussions, we discovered that if we, for an extra $50,000, we can get a better HVAC system, if I'm understanding you correctly, we could not, as a board, add $50,000 to that $250 that already came from the Board of Selectmen. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's a fair statement.
Okay, and so what would have to happen if we wanted, I think what you said already, what would have to happen is we would make ourselves, the board's feelings would be made clear at a meeting, and it would go back to the Board of Selectmen, and if they wanted to, that board could add the extra $50,000, then it would come back to us. Is that correct?
Correct. I mean, often the negotiations occur at these meetings.
Okay. And I guess,
The selectmen are present, and
and so for the members of the board, I'm just curious, have we, other than major building projects, do you all recall whether or not we've ever done anything like that over the
do
years?
recall us doing it.
Okay.
do you remember?
I do. I can't remember.
Yeah.
What comes to mind is a fire truck at one time, I think, years back. I think we added a fire truck. I mean, Mr. Kiley's here, and he sat on this board for 15-odd years or so. Not that I want to date him, but I think
No,
he
we're all
recalls.
sort of long in the tooth here.
Yeah, I think he recalls adding things as well, based on discussions with him. He's shaking his head yes. Mr. Walsh, did you have, I'm sorry, Mr. Mottola, you mean to cut you? You said, yeah. Mr. Walsh.
So what your legal position is that the Board of Finance does not have the legal authority under town charter or state law to amend the dollar amount of the resolution?
We're talking a pure bonding resolution.
Well, why don't we start off with bonding resolutions, then we'll get into resolutions in general.
They're a distinct thing. There's
Okay.
some-
Why don't we start off with bonding resolutions to begin with, and then we'll go to other types of resolutions.
Okay.
Bonding resolutions.
I would take bonding resolutions, unless you had a charter provision giving you that power, you would not have that right.
So we can't change the dollar amount that comes from the Board of
No, you
Selectmen.
can, traditionally, you've had you could cut it down.
So we can cut it only in one direction.
Yes.
And that's what this, is that from state law?
Well, I mean, it's very unclear what bonding law is on that issue, and it is if there was an affirmative charter provision giving you that, I would say you would have that power.
Okay,
Without
does-
the provision,
And is there a provision in the charter?
there's very little guidance on bonds. There's only one reference to bonds in the charter.
Okay.
And that, I mean, that's,
So there's nothing in state law that says we can't increase it, but it's your legal position that
oh,
we
no,
can just
it's
decrease
nothing.
it.
The state law gives the town a great deal of freedom if it exercises it through its charter.
Explain that to me.
The home rule statute in Connecticut gives the municipality powers over certain areas. And these kind of procedural issues, the town can establish its own policies and they will supersede the state statute or other actions.
All right, so are you saying that we have set a precedent within our town of only being able to reduce the amount of the bonding resolution?
That's what was my understanding.
Mr. Flynn, you have recollection, though, that we've increased a bonding resolution.
I do.
Yeah.
I also have Mr. Mayor, Mr. Kiley, Mrs. Leclerc, do you remember?
I think so.
So,
I'm
maybe-
just
Yeah.
having trouble with
But
specific.
this was
All right, maybe by our next meeting, you and the town attorney can research that issue and go back over the previous bond resolutions to see whether we've done it, because I guess we need to establish what home rule is here and what the rules that we're playing by are, because there seems to be some confusion on this board about what our role is in it. And I think we need to lock it down, not only for now, but in the future. And I think if we got something specifically in writing by the town attorney, we'll always have something in our minutes about what home rule is.
Agreed. Mr. Mottola, did you have a comment on that?
Just, so basically, because our charter lacks a provision that gives us the authority to add, based on state law, et cetera, because there's no such charter provision, it's your opinion that we don't have that authority to add. Is that correct?
yes.
Okay, and so basically, it's based on our charter, it's the RTM, I think you said, that actually can add at that point. What we do is recommend, is that a fair statement? And if you don't know, that's okay.
No, I mean, the trouble is, we have the school, we have a couple of areas where the law is very clear on who can authorize the bonds. And those are refundings and schools. And there are probably some other esoteric area that there's some specific statute dealing with it. And those, the RTM is given a total writing privilege in effect, but even those are subject to certain restrictions.
So I would agree with Mr. Walsh, and I'm sure the chair agrees with this, that I would like something in writing on this, so we don't run the risk of violating the law, that's all.
Yeah. I, number one, completely agree. I think others on the board wouldn't completely agree. And my memory goes back, we have done it, but again, these could have been school projects. I want to check that, because I want to know what
Yeah,
was
so
done in the past. Mrs. Leclerc?
Oh, yeah. Is it in the charter where the RTM has the?
No, it's in the statute.
It's in the
It's super,
statute.
which,
It doesn't say anything in our charter.
But that's no different than our budget process at the end of the year. I mean, the RTM's the last stop. They adopt the budget. In terms of in terms of their role as the last stop, doesn't change whether this is addressed or not. They are the legislative body, and they're
Body,
the
yes.
last stop, right?
yes, but sometimes they don't have their procedural requirements before getting there. And sometimes those are superseded.
Let's go to, do you have a follow-up to that, Ms. Leclerc?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Please.
so.
Then I'll go to
See,
Mr. Beck on the
I
next
guess
one.
where I'm struggling is that these items were items that have been specifically pulled out of our budget, where we can appropriate money in the budget and we can increase, decrease, and transfer. But these are larger items which it would be unfair to ask the taxpayers to pay for it all in one year. So instead, we're saying we'd rather pay for it over several years. So I'm having a hard time understanding why that would be any different. It's just that it's a different funding method that we're using, but we're still appropriating money that would,
Yes, I'm not saying the law is totally consistent on that point. That's what I'm.
but isn't this just part of the budget process?
there's sort of a separate rules applying to bond authorizations because they are not part of the annual budget and don't immediately go into taxes. And I'm not saying if we're going to redesign the world that it shouldn't be that way, but a lot of these things developed historically, and the legislation was written for one incident and did not integrate well with the whole structure. Which is,
You okay, Ms. Claire, for now?
no, I mean, it is,
Let's go to Mr. Becker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you said something about 5 minutes ago or so about the recommendation part, and that the Board of Finance is one of the bodies that recommends, but you also made a comment that we don't have to. Are you saying that this could, in theory, it could go from the Board of Selectmen right to the RTM? Because that then starts to, when you go to Ms. Leclerc's point, when you kind of talk about the charter and the word appropriation and the budget, now you're talking about some of the, basically the largest expenditures in some way not passing through the Board of Finance, which just starts to make
traditionally in
not a
Fairfield,
lot
they
of
always
sense.
have. I'm just saying the statute is synced on that, and there's actually an old Attorney General ruling saying you didn't need the appropriation from the Board of Finance to approve a school bond.
And you're saying then that,
Is it my understanding that you also don't need the Board of Selectmen? So the Board of Education theoretically could go directly to the RTM?
Theoretically, yes. And the way,
Wow.
the trouble gets to the difficulty of you need to get funding from the state, a building committee in place, and you have to, which requires the selectmen to appoint the committee and proceed it. And
Unless you'd have an RTM that chose not to get that reimbursement, correct? So if you had 26 RTM members who send, one of them puts together and someone seconds it and says, I want to do a $25 million bond, your position is that the RTM can do that on their own accord. If the first selectman chooses not to set up the building committee because he's not happy about this $25 million bond, all that really means is that because he doesn't set up, the first selectman didn't set up that building committee, we just can't apply for reimbursement on that.
and
Which would be to his political detriment, I believe.
Yeah, I mean,
Because
I'm
the
talking
bond's
about
funded, the finance department gets all the money in. We have to do the $25 million bond, and if the first selectman chooses not to set up the building committee, all that really means is,
well,
we're not
he
going to
doesn't
get
have much of a
reimbursement.
bond either.
Excuse me? He doesn't have to sign the bond?
I mean,
Is that what you're
I
saying?
mean, I know the hypothetical you're giving. It
Yeah.
doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
and the building committee actually can come before the appropriation to some extent, right?
Oh,
I mean, the
usually,
building
yeah.
committee gets formed, they maybe get some seed money, but then the full appropriation. So maybe they say, oh, we want the building committee, goes down the line, they get it, and then they come in with the big appropriation,
Right.
and
No,
pat-
but
and
you-
it skips
really
all
has
the
to be tied
boards.
to the board. The building committee
Just-
seems to be,
I don't know. I mean, so maybe when rendering the opinion, we can look into what's happened in the past and the role of past practice, which is generally recognized as a
Yeah.
pretty substantial component, and some of the points that we've made about some of these things that have happened in the past. And I'll do some research on my end, but I'm pretty sure, and it was before I was on this board, but it was when I was on the RTM, I recall a bond being started here, the Board of Selectmen not being required to, but taking it up at their next meeting to simply, give their blessing, and then it moving to the RTM. But it actually was initiated here, and I don't think that would be considered like a full school building project. It was a capital improvement level or some sort of other item like that.
and that, I think there was
So-
agreement at this meeting that
But agreement or not, I mean, that's still the transactions all happening before anybody, with
No,
not-
but I mean, you're saying.
You don't
I'm
know
saying
until
the
they say
critical
okay.
issue is the agreement between the two boards, and
And I guess, on my end, one of the concerns would be, like, if you take, for instance, if you take these boilers as an example, the Board of Selectmen goes, well, you know what, it's just not gonna happen. that it's always been that there's that there's a check there on the raising and lowering side. We get that the RTM can only reduce, but on the adding or raising, that there is some sort of a check between those two other boards.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Lesser.
thank you. Rather than go back and forth, I think it's better that if you have questions, specific questions, we'll be happy to give you an opinion on them. Just let us know what the questions are. We'll get together and we'll do an opinion, rather than ask hypotheticals and go back and forth here tonight.
Thank you for that. I'm going to
And we'll be
continue to
happy to
allow
do
some
that.
questions, but I appreciate that, and we will submit them. Mr. Becker, you all set?
I'm good on my end, and yeah. thanks.
Mr. Walsh? No, Mr. Clary. Mr. Clary, we would like you back. Nice try. We won't hit you with hypotheticals.
Defending our legislature for being.
No, look, I mean, the fact of the matter is, we were actually told last meeting that you had issued an opinion on this, and that the opinion was different than the way we've operated for a number of years, or at least the way many of us thought we operated for the number of years. And I even checked with the last chief fiscal officer, and he believes it was different, though I don't want to put words in his mouth. So we were told that it was your opinion. So we wanted to make sure that we have it right, because our goal is to follow the law. So that's why we're asking the questions. Mr. Walsh?
So we're going to get an opinion then about whether we're able to increase the appropriations, bonding resolutions at all, correct? Okay. Because if we're not, I guess then we're left with whether we just vote up or down. If we think it should be more, we just have to vote down, correct?
Okay, yes.
Is that correct? Okay.
That's what I mean.
Okay.
The question we're going to answer.
Okay. If we vote to change the amount down, because you seem to think that we have the vote to decrease the appropriation, does that have to go back to the Board of Selectmen? Does that have to go back for their recommendation on that amount? This
Well,
is,
they've already recommended an amount in excess of it, and that covers it.
so if we reduce it, they don't have an option to say whether they want to give an opinion about whether they want it to go to the RTM with an opinion or not, because they've actually recommended it at a higher amount at that point in time. I'm trying to figure out because it raises an interesting issue about whether things need to go back to the Board of Selectmen. And having served on that body for a while, I kind of would, if I was sitting on that body, would like to give an opinion whether I think it's worthwhile or not to do it at that point in time. But you're saying we don't, that it just would go to the RTM. And it's all a recommendation, correct? It's a recommendation from the Board of Selectmen, and it's a recommendation from us. And I guess we could choose to not recommend anything. Like, we take no action.
You take no action, and that's what we're talking, which happened at the last meeting, you deferred.
Okay. What about changing, not dollar amount, because that's what I asked you about the first time, but actually what I think is called now Schedule A, the actual what is to be done with the money? Do we have the ability to take things out of it or add things onto it, or neither?
Sort of divide the resolutions into two classes on that. There are authorizations for a school project, which is very large and has many elements in it. And usually the description is not overly precise. So there, I know there has been some.
He
Would you
someone's.
use the microphone,
Oh,
please?
sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Clary.
Yeah.
So it all depend on what?
If you have a discrete project, I think it is an up or down vote, or,
But we can't add or subtract something.
oh, no, I was switching to your next question
Okay.
of the description of the project, and do you have some input into the description in the bond resolution. I mean, historically, you've had input on those issues, usually to clarify or to expand the bond resolution to more clearly express the nature of the project.
All right, but if there was some definitive, I mean, an issue came up the last time about, when we were talking about school security, about connecting one building to another. And say we did not want to do that, but it said that some of the money, because it's been getting kind of detailed. I don't know if you've looked at them, but they seem to get more detailed every year.
Yes. I mean,
And-
that's partly,
So say this body decides that, let's just stay with the decrease, we don't want to pay for that, and we specifically don't want that. Do we have this body have the ability to amend that resolution to take that out?
I would, now I'm thinking, since we're going to give you written advice, I'll wait to give that. But I
Okay.
mean, that's a distinct.
That's
a different-
that's
I
fine.
think
I'd rather get the
that's
right answer, so if you want to think about it or do research on that, I have no problem with that. I'd rather just get the right answer on that. I don't know whether this is with,
No, that's for the.
Okay. no, I wanted to talk about whether building committees have the right to.
Yeah, we'll do that with Fairfield Woods.
Okay, all right.
Great. Any
That's all I
other
have for right now.
questions? Anybody else? We would appreciate your opinion on this matter. I think it's both what our past precedent is, what we're allowed to do. We want to do it right.
Right.
I'm surprised this came up now. It came up last meeting. I was alerted 5 minutes before the meeting, which is why we asked you to be here. We want to make sure we do what we need to do in the appropriate way. So,
Yeah.
that's why this is there. Any other questions?
Tom, I'd just like to confirm. I think we all want to be consistent, and we
Yes.
want to, we want to have there be a precedent on this board, and we want to be able to look towards a document that documents what our role is in this process. So when it comes to adding or subtracting things, what is our role and what is the authority for that? That's what we're trying to figure out. And I think we were all surprised at the last meeting, whenever we learned that what seemed to be past practice wasn't past practice. I think there's a refinancing thing that we're going to be talking about that, once again, we're being surprised about what this body's role may or may not be in that. And it just seems to be, what seemed to be past practice is all of a sudden, on these two, what I consider to be major issues, all of a sudden, not what the practice is. And I think we need some
No,
definitiveness
no.
so that we know where we're going and what our role is as a body.
No, I was just sort of surprised as to your response to the boiler question. 'Cause I thought that was consistent with our prior practices and your intent to make sure these resolutions were narrow and you knew where the funds you were authorizing and cutting down the discretion of the.
We'll get to the discussion of the narrowness of funds, I think, in another topic that is going to come up in a couple from here. So, I agree with Mr. Walsh's sentiments on this. I'm sure we all do. I think we're just looking for consistency of past practice. I also think it would be good if the state statute is, as you say it is, deferent to what the town wants to do, assuming we have a charter revision commission at some point soon. I think this is a major area that should be considered in that charter revision.
Uh,
So, any other questions on these bond resolutions?
Well, a quick one, and that is, the one thing I do remember that we made changes to was the bond in term, and so I just want to know, has that changed, that if we can make adjustments there, or if we'd have to send it back to the Board of Selectmen?
The term of the bonds.
Yeah, like, whether it's
Mm,
5
yeah,
years or 10
fine.
years.
That We'll give you that answer, too. I guess it makes more sense since we're going to give written advice to.
Yeah, and Mrs. Leclerc's 100% right. There are many examples
Yeah.
of us changing the bond term.
The last thing is, in your opinion that you, when you draft it, if there's a difference between a bond resolution and a regular resolution on our call, I think we need to know that. Like, if we're allowed to not increase a bond resolution, but if we have a resolution, a regular resolution that does not involve a bond, I think
Yes.
we're going to need to know that we can in one and we can't in the other. Because I think in order for consistency,
Distinguish between the normal
Yes.
process, yeah.
yes.
That makes,
This way, we're all consistent and no one gets confused saying, I thought we could, and then we find out it was okay for a bond, but not for a regular resolution or something else like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, concerns on bond resolutions? On the bond resolutions before us, on any of the items?
With the attorney or in general?
In general, and
Yeah.
please.
Maybe if,
Mr. Clary, thank you very much, and we'd appreciate you staying around for the next couple of items, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
looking forward.
Thank you.
so on the, this is on the turf. I saw the supplemental document, and if someone from the Board of Ed can be available for questions on that, maybe Mr. Cullen or.
Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you. So, okay, so I've got the memo. Everybody else, it was issued at the end of the week. This number came from where? Is this the same company that provided that spec document to do the rubber turf, or is this somewhere else? Where did you get this?
No, it's
set
from one of the
numbers?
manufacturers, Sprint Turf.
Okay, so it's the same one. They had this.
Yeah, we've been talking to 3 different companies that install the artificial turf fields.
And this would, the number's high because they're going to have to go in and basically rip
Remove the
everything
base,
up.
yeah.
All the way, this would go all the way down to the base and start fresh with that type.
Right, the coconut cork fin fill,
Okay.
the different system.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
and also the fact that you have to put an irrigation system in.
Yep. And the other question is in just in looking to try to get away from, the rubber fill. So obviously the cork is one of the options. Are there any other options that we know of? Something that then doesn't require, this sort of annual maintenance then to it, or is this sort of the only alternative?
No, there was a third option we researched, but it's out of Canada. It hasn't been put in the United States. It's an organic material. It's a microbial fiber. We had a lot of trouble researching what chemicals were in it, and couldn't find any installed in the United States.
Okay. So on the less maintenance end,
Right.
really either go
Correct.
with the rubber or you go with this.
Correct.
Okay. And if you could just bring me back, we may have covered this at the last meeting, but if we wanted to go with grass, the issues there were,
Many.
okay.
Yeah,
I thought
More
so.
injuries, as I
I'm ju-
recall.
More injuries, field usage, it would take at least a year or 2 for it to be put in. You have no place to use it. Mr. Lombardo gave a long description of the use of the fields by the
That's-
town
Right.
that would be unavailable, upkeep, et cetera. There were numerous issues with the grass. And you have one grass field at one high school and a turf at the other. Probably not a good idea.
So in the turf realm, you basically either have the rubber at the original number, or you've got this. Is that, that's basically where we're at.
Right,
at
we
this
want,
point.
we're confident, the health department is completely certified, the healthfulness of the field that we're recommending. And so we're not trying to get away from the crumb rubber field. But the field needs to be replaced, and needs to be replaced soon.
Okay.
You all set?
I'm good on the questions.
Thank you. Mrs. Cook-Littman, and then I'll go back to Mr. Walsh.
Thank you. I've heard that some of the crumb rubber fields are also mixed with sand. Do you know if this field will have some sand in it, what the ratio is, or if it's all just crumb rubber?
No, it's mostly crumb rubber and the existing base that came with the existing system.
I'm just putting it out there that I know that is another option that some other schools have done where they have a larger percentage of sand versus the crumb rubber. And I completely appreciate the perspective that this upcharge might really just be cost prohibitive, but I do have concerns. I know that the health department put out that report that crumb rubber is perfectly safe, but I think that for our town, we have to be aware that there could end up being problems in the future. And then what happens if 3 or 4 years from now, 5 years from now, we learn that, in fact, these health concerns that are being raised now are serious concerns? I know that a lot of people think the report that came from the state was really just a whitewashing of the issue. And it's hard for me to believe that old rubber tires are perfectly safe for our kids to be playing on, because this is really a waste product that the rubber tire industry would have to pay to get rid of, and instead we're paying them to put it in our fields where our kids play. So it just causes me concern that in the future it could make us susceptible to liability if more proof comes out that it's dangerous. And so I would just ask that when you're looking to put the fill in, just look into the sand, that the ratio be less rubber, more sand.
We can only go with the health department's, I mean, we have no greater expertise than the Department of Public Health has. So we certainly can look into the sand crumb rubber combo if that works just as well. If you, okay.
Thank you, Ms. Cook-Littman. Mr. Walsh.
Mr. Cullen, based on your memo, the February 11th memo, the new one regarding the, answering some of the questions regarding the coconut cork infill, over the 8-year warranty period, it's $687,000 difference, correct? Because you have $50,000 of cost, extra cost per year. For the 8 years, it'd be $400,000 plus the $287,500 for the irrigation system.
No, the $287,500 is just upcharge from the black crumb rubber system to the coconut cork infill.
Okay. So now we're at 687 plus an irrigation system?
Yes.
And what would an irrigation
The
system,
irrigation system's about 50,000.
50 grand?
And then the statement came out from the manufacturer that most of the cork infill systems they have seen are wetted down before every game. And that's where they recommended an irrigation system be put in. And then they said the other thing is they have found with the cork infill systems, and they have heard that yearly they need to come out and add cork to the field. It seems to dissipate, crumble, crack down more than the black crumb rubber. So we should figure on $50,000 over the 8-year warranty period to add cork infill every year.
So it's not 50,000 times 8.
Oh, okay. It's not
That- that
50,000 a
would-
year. It's
Right.
one time $50,000 for the 8 years.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Okay. No more questions.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Cullen, Dr. Tidal, on this or any other project in the non-recurring? Mrs. Leclerc.
I'm not sure how much we can talk about this one, so stop me if I'm going off. But with the security improvements, I'm concerned that we're going to bond them over 20 years and they don't have that long of a life. Some may, but I think a lot of them won't. So I don't know how to break that up or how to even discuss that further.
Would you like to, Mr. Mayor, are you involved in this in terms of the timing of these, how these are bonded?
No. Chief Lydia's here. You're talking about with the life of the, I don't know.
Yeah.
Familiar enough with the item.
I don't want to get specifics, but to Mrs. Leclerc's point, are there elements of this that have less than a 20-year useful life that we should be bonding over a shorter period of time?
I would say there's a couple of items that probably don't have a 20-year life. Certainly anything technology, software related, 20 years is a long time.
Give me a
And
rough breakout of the 1.7.
I don't know if we would want to do that.
Right.
Get into
Speak up,
specifics.
please.
We're
I
not
don't
sure
know if
we'd
we
want
would
to
wanna break that out.
break that out in public, exactly what lifespan is for each of these items. I mean, we were not involved in deciding how long to bond them for. We gave you the list. So,
Who decided on the, first of all, thank you, Mrs. Leclerc, that's an excellent point.
No, it is.
I mean, it's not our department.
Agreed.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I'm the one that put it in the 20-year slot because I was under the impression that, is this on? Hello? Okay. Yeah, I made the decision to put into, because I was under the impression that they were, the vast majority of this stuff was infrastructure related, and therefore 20 years was appropriate. But I guess we're hearing now that there's and I guess I don't understand what, I mean, forgetting the prior conversation?
Which I'm not sure we can, but go ahead.
Yeah, okay.
I'd love to.
Yeah, I'm just, okay. Forgetting the prior conversation and basing what I'm going to say here on what the town has possibly consistently done, and if there could be somehow an understanding of, a better understanding determined in an executive session of what the breakdown is, I would suggest the board do that and make motions to move some money around.
Do you have your hand up, Mr. Wall?
Well, I think we might have to do that only because, I mean, I don't think any of us wants to sit here with, if a bunch of this is computer equipment and stuff that's needed to be upgraded within 5 years or shorter, and be paying it for the next 20 years while we bought 2 other systems since then.
Correct. In the way this is broken out, I don't want to, again, to Mrs. Leclerc's point, I don't want to do anything in public session that is better for private. But let's recall that we broke this package into 2 discrete years, right? But the question is, in this year, are some of those items included in that package less than 20-year items? And I believe the answer to that is probably yes, right?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Mottola?
So just so I'm understanding the process, if we agreed that 1 or 2 of these items was less than 20 years, would we then bond it for a lesser amount, 5 years?
Yes, this
Something to
board
that effect?
thank you, Mr. Mottola. This board adopted a policy a number of years ago with what the attempt is, anything we bond, to not bond for more than the useful life of the item, so that we're not paying off something that's been retired, and therefore double paying for something as we're paying for the replacement and paying for the older one. So the point is an excellent point, and consistent with past policy adopted by this board. Sure.
These are 5, 15, and 20.
The bonds are 5, 15, or 20, but I believe the security system is all in the 20. And what this would result in is some of that being perhaps in each of the 3 buckets,
Yes, exactly.
right? Any other comments on this? Maybe let's get everything out on the table so that we don't have any other surprises on this evening. Okay, now we've got a sticky situation, right? Because bond counsel has not been able to assure us, at least this evening, that we can change the time frame of these bonding resolutions, correct? Right. But
That means the 5-year bond would be increased, and we don't know if we have the authority to do that.
correct. So, in essence, if we want to follow our own guidelines, which is to not bond something for longer than the period, then we should delay action on these items kick it back to the Board of Selectmen and ask them to vote on it with the appropriate number of years, dividing up the security appropriation, bonding package, correct? Mr. Stone?
I might be way out of line, but
Yeah, you are.
I'm sure I am. The security and safety infrastructure, I mean, it's pretty vague. So can't we pass it and they juggle it around?
Can't juggle it by the number of years. It's all within the 20-year. This would be splitting it amongst the years.
Yeah, but it doesn't say what we're doing with it.
No, but
Do you
that's
know
the
what I'm
point.
getting?
I do, but that's why I asked the question. I was going exactly where you were.
Yeah.
But I asked the question as to what the funds this year were going to be
Yeah.
used for, and they immediately replied that it would be used for things that would be under a 20-year useful life.
Just trying to move it along.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay, can I have a motion then by someone? Mr. Becker?
Yeah, make a motion that we postpone to be a date certain, which is our, would we just at our next regular meeting, right? Because we've
We
got
don't have
budget
a next
meetings.
regular meeting,
At
correct?
this point, we have budget meetings, so do we want to just do it our first budget meeting night?
Yeah. Perhaps
So,
we can do that.
date
Can you give us the
certain
date of
being,
that?
what is that, the sixth?
March 3rd.
March 3rd, then. So postpone to March 3rd.
Now, second, okay. I'm going to ask for any questions on that, and I have a question on that. Mr. Tetro here? Can you, I have a question for you, sir. Thank you, gentlemen. So I think,
For asking, and I thought our conversation earlier was memorable, Tom.
go ahead. Question. Are you guys going to meet, what I'm assuming is going to happen here, okay, is we're going to delay this to a date certain, but probably take a sense of the body and ask for you guys to rejigger the 5, 15 year and 20, right? I don't want that date certain to come before you guys have the opportunity to consider it, you guys and a lady, have the opportunity to consider this at one of your Board of Selectmen meetings. So what meeting might you consider it at so that we can put this on an appropriate agenda?
Well, if it can get through bond counsel and finance, we potentially could consider it tomorrow afternoon.
You can add that to your agenda within 24 hours?
Yes. Yeah, it takes a you can add any item, any
Yep,
voting
yep.
item to your agenda. It takes a two-thirds vote to do that. It's unusual, since you
Right.
like to give people notice so the
Exactly.
public can come and comment and folks can consider what's going on. Because, again, I can't speak for the board. I would suggest that they might consider it because these are items we've already considered and because what you're talking about is the term and the financing.
Correct.
And we're familiar with the bonding policy, and that makes appropriate sense in terms of what the questions raised here were. If not, I would think that our board could arrange to have a special meeting in time to help address this by the time you needed it. But again, I'd have to talk to the board members to confirm that. It would be my understanding that everybody would want to work to help both correct this, make sure we're on a straight and narrow, if you will, and move it to your board on a timely basis.
Great. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Okay. Any other questions on this item?
I don't know if this matters, but technically, your first budget meeting is a joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen.
Okay. We
So I
can
think you
arrange
could,
something.
right?
Thank you for that. Yeah. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, all in favor of delaying all three of these bonding items for consideration at our March 3rd meeting. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? I would like to propose a sense of the body motion that we ask the Board of Selectmen to reconsider the bonding terms of the school security infrastructure so that the different elements of that bond or the different time periods of that bond are coordinated with the useful lives of the items being purchased. Do I have a second to my motion? Mr. Brown? Any questions, comments? Seeing none, all in favor? That? Opposed? Abstentions? That item carries as well. So thank you. All right.
Tom,
Yes.
the bond council will be here when we,
Sorry?
will the bond council be here when we, on March whatever?
We can ask that the bond counsel be here for March 3rd or a representative from the firm. Thank you. All right. The next item is to hear an update on bond refinancing by the chief fiscal officer. Now, this is not a voting item this evening. This is just to hear an update. Yes. Please.
In checking with Ms. Bossi, our controller, the wording on the bonding resolution says not later than 20 years.
Oh, good point.
So potentially, with your guidance, you could direct the chief fiscal officer to bond those within their useful life.
Thank you. Thank you.
Or remind him that bonding policy says that, so even without your guidance, he would be constrained by bond policy.
Thank you very much. Mr. Walsh? I think we're already done with the item, though, unfortunately.
All right, I just don't know how that would exactly work. So we would be having 3 bonding resolutions, 5, 10, and 20. We're going to say take some of the 20, and for whatever the useful life is, all the stuff that's on the 20, to go through it, and then say, I'm only going to bond this for 3 years, this for 5. I'm a little confused.
I think you need to look at the mechanics on how this actually happens. Each individual item is discrete. So if we were to bond the boilers, even though that's,
You're just using it as an example.
yes, that item could be bonded at 20 years, and other items on that item would come the next year or the following year or some other time when they were actually purchased, right? And they'd be put into a different bond. So each of these things will be cut up and put into bands or bonds after they have been purchased. So it may happen at the same time and be part of the same issue, or it may not.
I think we've done it the cleanest way. Mr. Tetra, I think, is correct. I think we've done it the cleanest way.
So the question, I guess, is say there's a PC and the useful life is 3. So we're not even going to have 5. Now we'll have to put the PCs, like, as part of the security system. Will the PCs be in a 3-year bond when they finally get funded?
Well, if we were bonding PCs, which we don't, and since we generally use them for 5 years, I'm sure you can find 1 or 2 we didn't, but I suspect you'd find 99% of the time we've used them for 5 years or more, unfortunately. We certainly have bonded them over 5 years in the past, because that's the practical useful life, if not the manufacturer's recommended useful life.
Okay.
And I'm not recommending bonding technology, I'm just using your example.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know.
We've done it probably the cleanest way possible. I think Mr. Tetra raises a valid point, but we've done it. We've already taken the action. We've kind of settled on that. I think it's very clean. I think they can split it up over the next couple of days. We'll just vote it in on the 3rd.
Yep. And again, the premise I'd go back to is if we did a school building project, we do it over 3 or 4 years, we bond different part, even though we approve that all at once, we bond it in different pieces mixed with other items when we actually go out to the market.
The mechanics of it. Thank you, Mr. Tetra. Item number 2, to hear an update on bond refinancing by the chief fiscal officer. And to the point, in the past, while we voted on refinancing, based on an opinion from our bond counsel, who I've asked to stick around for this, tonight, this is just an update, no action to be taken by this board. Mr. Mayor was kind enough to provide information, as well as bond counsel, related to the opinion and where it's quoted in state statute. And Mr. Mayor, I'll turn this over to you so we can hear an update on this item. And Mr. Clare, if you'd like to come up in the event of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Timing is everything, right? This wouldn't, I think, have the focus it has if it wasn't for the other portions, the other bonding issues. What happened here was when our financial advisors and bond counsel and myself made a decision that it was the right time to go out and do something, and we're going to try to do it in March. And to get it to the RTM, to the Board of Selectmen, to the Board of Finance, to the RTM, for the RTM meeting this month, we had missed the cutoff date for the Board of Selectmen agenda. So that's the reason that we pulled this particular statute out. It was just to expedite the process. Couldn't think that there'd be any concern or issue with the issue. I thought it'd be pretty nebulous.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask you a question on that?
Yeah.
So we just had the first selectman say that he could add something to the Board of Selectmen.
I heard that myself, and I said, damn, why did he say that?
Because it kind of undercuts the whole.
Well, the agenda had been cut up, but yes, it could have been added.
Okay, so it could have gone to the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah, could have gone through the normal process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because in this instance, there has been a process established for the town. I'm not saying that the state statute requires it or anything, but there was a precedent. We have voted on refinances in the past.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's the only reason that it didn't come as a voting item was, and I'm not sure I was aware of the two-thirds rule, but with less than 24-hour rule. Anyway, so as a result of that, we took it to the Board of Selectmen as an information-only item, and that's why we're here as an information-only item. The bottom line is we have somewhere a minimum of $25 million to a maximum of $35 million in bonds that are callable from the issue dates of 2007, 2008, and 2010. The amount of time, the term, I think we actually have 13 years. The document has 12. I think I added it up wrong when I produced this. The gross savings spread over the term, given the interest rate assumptions of a week ago, 1.9 million. Financial advisor is on vacation today, so otherwise I would have updated that, but interest rates have not moved really at all. Present value of the savings is $1.6 million. And the goal is, if interest rates stay where they are, is to have this out in March.
Questions from board members? Mr. Walsh?
I think it's more of a process. So once again, we're saying that the Board of Finance has real no role in this, correct? But we've done 5 refinancings approximately over the last 5 years, and we brought it to this board. In essence, when I look at something like that, it's kind of wasting this body's time, since we don't have a role in it, and making us consider it, read stuff, have the public hear, everything else like that, when, in essence, we really don't have a defined role pursuant to the statute at all in this. So it's either you want a recommendation or you don't want a recommendation, and I think if that's the case, if we don't really have a role, then we don't have a role. I'm not looking to add to our work. We have plenty of stuff to do. So if it's not our role, it should not come to us. If that's what the legal opinion is. I don't see why we'd be wasting our time adding stuff to our agenda that we have no role in.
Well, I'm certain that I, as the Chief Fiscal Officer, would bring this to the Board of Finance as an informational item unless you asked me not to, even if you made that decision. The one thing that's different about this particular state statute, though, is that even if in the charter required it, the RTM could still pass and it would still be valid without the Board of Finance. So it's a real firm state statute from that perspective.
And the Board of Selectmen has no role in it either.
Correct.
We can start knocking stuff all off all these people's bodies. It could just go from whether the administration wants to do it and take it right to the RTM.
Well,
And we'll
refinancings are pretty, refundings are
Sorry?
fairly narrow. you've already authorized the bonding, and they're really just trying to issue replacement bonds to cut down the cost of financing the project.
But theoretically, they could increase the cost inadvertently, but they could increase the cost, right? I mean, if they could goof it up, is what I'm saying.
Aren't there ways of doing the financing where you could take a large premium up front
Right.
and increase the interest rate over time?
No, it's all usually present.
As long as the present value of the whole thing.
Right.
But I mean, the administration could say, we'll take $1 million in this year as a premium, so we can reduce this year's taxes. But you know what? For the next 4 years, our interest rate will be higher.
Right.
Because if the net present value of taking that $1 million in, plus the increased interest rate is still less, it's, under the statute, I think it works out to be a favorable result.
Just to clarify, that's not how it works, as much as the math might work that way, and technically you could do, we basically go out to bid in the market. What comes back are the interest rates and the coupon fee. It's calculated, it's, in fact, Jim, didn't you sit in on one of those sessions?
I sat in, and I thought there was one year where we had this huge bond premium that came back in, where we had to spread it out. We had to get legal opinions and
3
bond
years.
opinions. We had to spread it over 3 years.
It was very straightforward. We just split it over 3 years, but that wasn't a negotiated agreement. That's how it came back in. That was bid off the market.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, there's different things that can happen. It's not straightforward that we're just getting a less interest rate over the next remaining term. It's, these premiums come in, and that's, what I'm hearing is that this board has no role in it, either does the
No.
Board of Selectmen.
The RTM is not making the decision. They are authorizing the refi.
Mm-hmm.
It is the committee that you sat on as a
Yep.
member of the Board of Selectmen.
Yes, I did.
When you were on the Board of Selectmen.
Yes.
That's made up of the Board of Selectmen, the Chief Financial Officer, and the Town Treasurer
Mhm.
that actually decides which bid to accept.
Exactly.
And those signatures, or a majority of those signatures, are required on it to accept it. So the practical reality is what you're suggesting would be difficult to achieve, given that oversight and that control.
Well, I'm saying I saw it happen.
No,
We saw it happen because we took
That's-
this huge premium in.
Yeah, that's
That
the
was
way-
sitting on this huge premium that was sitting on our books that we were trying to figure out what to do with it.
We weren't trying to figure out what to do with it. It's very clear what to do with it. You can use it to reduce debt service, period. That's the only thing you can do with it.
It's over the matter of years you can use
Yes.
it, correct?
Yeah, 1 to 3.
Yeah.
Right.
So this body, the bottom line is this body has no role in it. We really shouldn't look at it.
The reason it's brought before the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance this year, because it's a different practice than we used in the past, is to make sure everybody was updated on that, saw what was going on, and had a chance to ask any questions on that. That's all.
I
It did
think we
not
can
have
get-
to be here. It was for, it was purely for the objective of making, having a better understanding of this and making the process more transparent in terms of what we would do going forward. That's all.
I'm going to go to Mrs. Leclerc if you're done, and
Yeah,
then go to
I'm
Mr.
fine.
Leclerc. Mr. Leclerc?
This is just a quick question, and I've probably been told this before, but the life of these new bonds will be the exact life of the old bonds, that you can't extend the term? that
I
you
would,
have-
I would change the word the exact life, but you cannot make them last longer. You cannot extend the term of the bond.
You can
So if
shorten
it was originally a 20-year bond and there are 12 years left, the length of the refi would be 12 years. Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Could not be.
Okay, so that's not
Sometimes shorter.
flexible. That-
Yeah, we can't keep rolling the money over.
Okay.
All right? The end of the bond is the end of the bond.
Mr. Mottola?
All I was going to say was we may not have a legal voting role, but it's probably a prudent idea that when you do these things for informational purposes, you would let the Board of Finance know. That's all. I would think we all would like to know that as a Board of Finance, even though we're not voting on this. That's all.
And that makes sense, and that's why we're here.
What I would think would be actually handier, John, would be if the first selectman, after what happened, whatever happened once the RTM authorized it, would come back to this body, to tell us what the rate is, how that's going to change interest rates in the future years, so we can properly budget for it and know what's coming up. And if there's a premium, say there's a $2 or $3 million premium that we know that we can use over the next 3 years, we should probably know that we know going into this current year, we have $1 million favorable number going towards debt.
Well, I would point out that every single time we've done that, this board has been very much aware of that and how we plan to use it. That's been part of our standard process, so that's not a change. Once the RTM authorizes, again, all they did was authorize it. We may never do it. If the interest rates change in March, this doesn't happen. You're giving us, or the RTM would be giving us the ability to do it, not the requirement to do it. All right, and one of the reasons for getting that authorization is it's literally as, and again, as this board knows, because we've talked about this before, that you need to be able to strike while the iron is hot on any one point, and that's a function of monitoring the interest rates, which our advisors do, and come back to us and point out which days or which window of opportunity we have to do this.
Mr. Mottola?
So if I'm understanding this correctly, the RTM will give you the authority to do this, correct?
Yeah, it's just it's the same thing that the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and RTM have done in the past.
Right.
In this case, it's just the RTM, but it's the exact same process, the exact same authority.
Is there a window of when you have to do it, if you're going to do it, once they give you the authority?
I'm going to turn to Mr. Mayor on that one. I think it has to do with more with the interest rate window and what I'll call market realities than a significant cutoff time on doing that. But, Bob, can you answer that?
Yeah, there's no cutoff date in the resolution. It's
Okay.
going to be driven by market.
Gotcha,
Yeah.
thanks.
Any other questions, comments, concerns on this item? Mrs. Leclerc?
Sorry. The expenses to do this will all be rolled into the proceeds? Okay.
Correct. There's no out-of-pocket cost to the town.
Seeing none, anything from the public on this item?
I have one.
None, back to the board.
If the refinance doesn't happen, what happens to the expenses incurred up to that point?
I'm going to turn to Mr. Mayor or Mr. Cleary on
Who
that.
pays those costs? I presume someone pays them.
Actually, the tradition is that...
You need to speak into the mic.
excuse me. The attorneys and the underwriters do not render bills for the refunding until there is a refunding. So we wait until the next refunding and hope to recapture it. when
Do you
does
roll it
occur.
into the next refunding? So it's not, the debt's not forgiven, it's rolling into the next refunding?
Or the refunding of that matter. I mean, if you had a wholly different...
Credit agency reports, we don't have to pay for those, anything like that? Don't we have to go to the credit agencies and get an opinion saying what our credit rating is?
Yes,
We have to pay for those?
I would assume so, yes.
Yes,
Okay, so there are some costs.
correct.
Okay.
Any other questions on this item? Seeing none, we'll move on. And I'm going to ask that we take item number 6 first, which is the, and gentlemen, you can feel free to stay if you don't mind. I'm trying to get Mr. Clary out of here. Fairfield Ludlow High School Building Committee, an update by the First Selectman. And the First Selectman was kind enough to give me a call earlier today to tell me that although they did receive an update on this, it was not at the level of detail that the Board of Selectmen thought was sufficient. So they have asked for that building committee to reappear before them later this month.
They'll be coming back the first week in March.
Okay.
To the first Board of Selectmen meeting for the month.
So with that, I'll turn it over to the First Selectman so he can provide us an update on what they heard. We're asking this because the building committee chair is out of town, I believe, this evening. He said he was traveling this evening.
I'm going to say yes to that. I don't remember the exact reason he couldn't make it, but that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
So thank you for exercising your memory there, Mr. Flynn.
There you go.
Simply put, we'd asked because the building committee reports to the Board of Selectmen, we'd asked the building committee to come before the Board of Selectmen and give us an update as to where they are. Specifically, if you are familiar with the Ludlow Building Project, there's 3 phases. There's the roof, There's a classroom and cafeteria expansion, and there's a window replacement and PCB mitigation. There was 11.6 million in round numbers approved over a year ago for that project. There have been a number of issues as bids started to come back initially with the roof, taking more, costing more, and they eventually rebid that. We started talking about this with them last summer, and I think, Mr. Flynn, you and I had a conversation last summer about some of the concerns on the costs.
Correct?
As they've continued to refine the costs and got a bid in on the cafeteria and classroom expansion, it looks like that's going to chew up most of the 11.6 million on just those two phases. One of the issues has been waiting for the EPA to approve the PCB mitigation plan to get a firmer figure on the cost for what I'm calling Phase 3. And we asked for an update. We also asked for the details on what drove the cost overruns. And when I say cost overruns, taking the original budget, looking at where they are now, and telling us what the drivers were for that, and breaking out what that is, and breaking out for all three phases. Assuming they go through with phases 1 and 2. They have gone to the Board of Ed, which they did last November, I believe, and had the ed spec change. So phase 3 is now an option as part of this project. We wanted to see a lot more detail in terms of what changed between the original budget and where they are now, what the time frame is, and some feedback as whether they're looking at phase 3 as eventually coming back to the boards for asking for more funding to complete that as part of this project, or whether they would look at breaking that off and possibly coming back as a separate project to look at doing that. So I'll have more updates after our meeting in March.
Thank you. Do we have questions? We'll go to Mrs. LeClaire first.
So how can that be allowed to happen? This started out as a Windows project that bounced around between town facilities and us for several years. It got combined by the Board of Ed into a building project to include three pieces because it was going to have a building committee, but that was always 3 specific pieces. You can look at the Board of Ed's waterfall chart and you can see 3 specific pieces. So how could that not come back to us to approve that the funding of the addition increased to such a large amount and to leave no funding for the windows? In the original bond resolution, there was a budget that was attached that had a specific amount for windows. And so how does that happen?
Good question. I'm going to look at that and say that the ed spec changed in terms of what came through here. I don't think that is legally binding in any way. And certainly there's no reason for it to come back to the Board of Finance until there's an actual request for a dollar increase.
But how can they spend funds that were allocated for the windows on something else?
I think because it's defined as one project, as I understand it.
Oh, great.
Mr. Brown?
Just to follow up, so a building committee has the authority to change the ed specs once we pass a bonding resolution?
No. The Board of Ed has the ability to change the ed specs, and that's what happened here. They went back to the Board of Ed, and the Board of Ed voted to change the ed specs.
We approved it before the ed specs.
Excuse me?
We approved it before the ed specs existed.
Who's we?
Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen. The funding was put in place first, and then the ed specs were developed.
That's typically not how we do it.
But we did it this time.
I'm not sure about that.
Pretty sure.
Well, we had to define all 3 phases to bring them together, so they'd have to...
Because it was based on a conceptual study.
Normally, there's no study done before we, vote for the project.
We did it this time, though, I think you're right.
That's the way this project was done.
Okay. Then I will defer to your memory of events. I'm not sure what the implication of that is.
Mr. Brown, did you have more?
Well, I guess my question is, how much leeway does a building committee have once a bonding resolution goes through Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, the RTM? We pass a bonding resolution, we think, well, what we're passing is what we're going to get. And then we don't know that it's changed until they say, look, we went over in certain aspects of this project, and now we need more funds. So basically, what we're doing is we're just allocating funds in general, but the bonding resolution gives specific factors of a project. We're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Can a building committee, once a bonding resolution has been passed, say, well, this is what we presented, because it's always presented, change their mind and say, we're only going to do 3 of the 5?
Actually, I'd phrase it another way. If a building committee came to us and said, things are getting tight, we'd ask them what they're going to change, what they're going to cut out, and how they're going to come in on time and under budget. That is what typically happens.
But that's not what happened.
Actually, I think that's exactly what happened. They realized they couldn't get the project done for in the amount allotted. They went back to the Board of Ed and changed the specs so they could complete a project that would get done for the money that was authorized to spend.
But they don't have to come in front of the boards, other than the Board of Ed.
To change the spec, no. For a building committee in particular, it's my understanding they have the authority to do that, yes.
Is that your opinion as well?
This is really a town governs issue that's outside of my
So when we vote on a project, we're not 100% sure really what we're going to get until the project's complete.
In one sense, that's correct. Except it's got to meet the ed spec. Right? And you know that we've authorized the people on it to meet the ed spec and stay within the budget.
I'm going to go to Mr. Walsh, who's been waiting patiently, then Mr. Becker, then Mr. Stone. Then I'll come to Mr. Mottola and back to Mrs. Leclerc. How do you like that? And if I can remember that, it'll be amazing.
So, Mr. Tetro, this phasing you talked about, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, that's your phasing, or is that their phasing numbers? Because I don't remember this as being a phased project where people were saying phase 1, phase 2, phase 3.
In the sense that you're talking about phase 3, which would typically be like year 1, year 2, year 3, we do one at a time, you're correct. Phase might not be the best description of that, but I believe that's what they're using, and that's what I borrowed.
Okay, so the building committee, on their own, chose to wait, and the whole PCB issue and windows, the child safety issue, they decided to put that last before then when they ran out of money. We'll go for the expansion, and we'll do the roof. And if we have money to do the other thing, we'll have to either come back to the town bodies or we won't be able to do it. Is that what they decided to do?
There are a couple of things here. One is that if you're asking for what the building committee was thinking a year ago when they laid some of this stuff out, I really think the most appropriate question or most appropriate people to answer that would be the building committee. However, I will say, based on discussions with the user, the principal, and with with Principal Ludlow and Dr. Title, they very, 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 very much wanted the science classrooms done in time for September 1st, and that was one of the big drivers in terms of breaking out the phases and deciding on the sequence.
Even if we don't have and we don't authorize any more money for the PCBs and the windows, which is totally the town body's decisions now.
Not entirely. Once the PCBs are discovered, there is a mitigation requirement based on the EPA, so I believe we're at some point on the hook for doing those, or at least cleaning up the PCBs.
So one of the lessons, I guess, to learn from this bonding procedure is that we have to have separate bonding procedure. We can't do this anymore because they can steal from one pot to do the other pot. So we would have definitely had, if we had done individual projects, we would definitely have had money still in some pot to do the windows.
I think there are a host of lessons that we can learn. I think this approach to building projects, we tried in my opinion, doesn't work, and I think we've got to make significant changes. I think we've looked at a number of things here. One, I do agree with that, and that's been one of the recurring themes as we look at all of this, that combining those, doing those all at one time, combining those into one kind of group of authorizations would be fine, but we need to make sure that those are broken down into single authorizations so there is a bit more control on that. Second, when I look at the different types of projects, and I look at the skill set needed to balance some of this, I've got significant questions as to why we're over on this much. And the issue is not so much the windows and PCBs as much as that much left. What happened is the first two phases chewed up the $11.6 million. The real question is what it is about the classroom expansion, the cafeteria expansion that we were so far off in the original estimates. The real question is why does the roof take that long? I mean, we could be over $1 million and say, hey, the windows and PCBs take another $1 million. The reason they take $4 million more is because they're over the original estimate, but they got bumped out of the 11.6 because those first two phases were literally $3 or $4 million over the original estimates, and that's the glitch. That's where it comes in. When you look for what some of the initial explanations are, I'm not sure that putting that on volunteers is maybe the best way. I think at some point we need to rethink how we do building projects, because we'd have one after another now that are coming through over for things like, when we looked at what didn't come before you, but raised some questions last time, was Osborne Hill and a corridor that went from $70,000 to $470,000. We're looking at Riverfield was pretty, unfortunately, pretty straightforward in terms of the PCBs were found in the gym, and that's the additional $2 million was about the gym issue, and in one sense, pretty focused, and that might have changed. But I think we need greater expertise on the town side in addressing this, and I think that's something I'm going to take a serious look at. On the Board of Ed side, you've got a Sal Morabito, you've got a Tom Cullen. There is no comparable person on the town side. We don't have somebody to work along these projects, and I think as projects get more complex, as we get into contamination, working with the EPA, doing our projects with volunteers means there's no institutional knowledge. It doesn't carry over to the next committee, next school. We bring in a new group of people. They're from a different neighborhood because it's their school, their area, and expect them to know all this, and they just don't. So I think that we have to look at upgrading how we approach building projects in order to do a better job and address some of the issues you started to mention, but I think there's a number of others we're learning out of this that we have to change.
Well, the interesting part that I find out what you just said was that on the Board of Ed side, they have Tom Cullen and Sal Morabito. Well, this is a Board of Ed building. So clearly having those two positions, and I'm not faulting those two gentlemen, but that didn't help as it relates to this building project because we're still many $1 million over. So I don't know how that would have helped having additional people on the town side with that level of expertise. I just point that out because it's a
It's a town building, and we have ownership of how that's going.
So what do Tom and Sal do all day?
I think it would be more appropriate to ask them directly.
It's a Board of Ed building. I mean, yes, we're in charge of the
And
process.
that is part of our system, that it's the town's requirement to build it. I mean, we went through this.
Yeah, but we
a
don't
number
call
of-
those guys off and say, you guys aren't allowed to participate. I mean, they're part of the process, right?
They're part of the, it's a question of who has authority and along with the building committee. And I think we can do a better job of providing support for the building committee, and I think that's got to come from the town side. And I think that also you have to take a long, hard look at how we structure building committees and how much we're asking our volunteers to do.
Okay. Mr. Walsh?
When did they first realize that they were going to be over?
I'm going to say last July.
This past July 14?
Yes.
July 14. And why didn't they come back to the town bodies? I thought we had a provision in our charter that said that they would have to come back if they're going to be over any appropriation to this body.
Well, I want to be careful with one thing here. And I don't disagree with what you said, so it's not contradictory. Last summer, there was a series of steps that were taken by the building committee, which caused them concern, right? We were alerted that they were going to rebid aspects of the project because they came up much more expensive than they had thought. Now, the reason I remember that is because we specifically asked this question at the workshop, the capital planning workshop.
Well, that was in September. You and I
was
talked in
gonna say,
July, yeah.
In September, we asked the question, and Dr. Title said they were still working through the numbers as to where they were going to be. Is that correct, Dr. Title? They did not have the actual what they were going to be over last September. There was a concern, but they didn't know the extent of the concern. They were going through remediation items, right? Now,
Well, go ahead.
now, subsequent to the capital planning summit, where we were told they were working through it, right? To your point, at some point in November, they went back to the Board of Education about the ed specs. Is that a fair summary? Dr. Todd, I'm looking at you.
When was that?
That was November. So your point still stands as it relates to the November timeframe, when they were concerned enough about that last portion as to what should have happened there. But it is not, in my estimation, fair about last summer, because at least what I heard at the capital planning workshop is they were still working through it. That's how I remember it.
Right, but you and I had conversations last summer, starting with when the first bid went out for the roofs, and it came back too high,
Correct,
and their answer was, we're going to rebid that.
correct.
Went back out, and we started talking as early as that time, saying if it doesn't come back much lower, what are your options?
Correct.
You have to go back and look at the specs, what can you change?
Correct.
Do you have to expand the cafeteria? Do you have to do other things as big as that? What are your options? And then do you need to go solve what you can within the specs that you have? Then you have to make two choices, either go back to the Board of Ed and get a spec change, or come back to the bodies and ask for more money. All right, and that was identified early on. So I was actually a little surprised that they hadn't updated, we didn't have a better update at the capital planning workshop. However, coming out of that, I sat down with the Ludlow Building Committee in the next week or so after that and got an explanation from where they were. They'd gotten I think the roof bid back at that point. They were trying to do a better job in getting the classroom and cafeteria expansion nailed down, which they didn't get till late in December. Looking at the timing then, they couldn't get the bids back and authorization done and get approval money through the bodies at that point, or approval for more money through the bodies at that point. So they went back to the Board of Ed and got the ed spec changed.
Why did they make that decision that they couldn't get the approval back? That's the part I don't understand.
Just the timing on doing
I
it.
don't understand that, though.
When we mapped out the dates, Tom. We couldn't get there in terms of Board of Selectmen, Board of
When
Finance,
did they need to be
RTM.
there by? I mean, the work on the windows
You had
could
to
be
get,
later, right?
when we mapped it out at that point, Tom, we couldn't get there between getting the approvals, getting the bid, getting the bids back. The timeline didn't work.
I don't understand, but okay. Mr. Walsh, I didn't want to cut you off. I just wanted a point of clarification. Because there were emails on this, there were communications, so, as of last summer.
So the Board of Ed can change the ed specs along the way and add stuff. So they could say there was 5 science rooms, they could add a 6th one, and then we're still responsible to cover it with the money that we appropriated?
Interesting question.
ask
Generally,
bond
we
counsel.
Yeah, generally go back to the ed specs to reduce something. Potentially it could change. Doing that for the same money would be a challenge.
I'm just concerned because I did not know that you could change an ed spec, because if you're saying they could change the ed specs, then they could ask for better things. They could ask for more things than we thought that they were going to do.
Changing the ed specs is something that's been considered on a number of projects over time, and is one of the steps we go through in terms of looking at that, and if we're having difficulty, can you go back to the Board of Ed, and what can you take out of the ed specs so it can get done? It's typically driven by a project that's projected to run over or run close to its cost, approved cost, so they're looking for what flexibility they have.
From what you've seen so far, have you seen changes in the ed specs that were made by the Board of Education that increased the cost dramatically?
Not only not on this project, I can't remember a single project where that's happened.
Okay, so not on this
I
project
can't
at all.
remember when there's ever been a request to the Board of Ed to do that at all. It's always,
You've not seen it on this project?
haven't seen on this project, nor on any other project, nor have I heard about it ever going to the Board of
Okay.
Ed to do
No,
something
because
like
you've mentioned a couple times earlier, and maybe I was just confused, that the ed spec changed a couple of times, and
I said
I'm hearing that, and I'm like, well, did the project increase? Are we asking for more stuff that wasn't
The-
originally
the ed spec changed once, just to be clear.
Okay.
all right? And it changed by saying instead of including the windows and the PCB mitigation in this project, it was changed to be optional, based on available funds.
Oh, that's a problem. It's now optional, okay?
For this project, not for, but for this project.
So the Board of Education then, at that point, has prioritized what they wanted done, and they made the windows and PCBs optional in their ed spec.
I would address that to the Board of Ed if you want a clear understanding.
Is that what they did? You were at these meetings. Is that what they did? Did the Board of Ed, by their change, make the windows and PCBs optional if there was enough money left?
Right, there were two changes made to the ed spec that were requested by the building committee to the Board of Ed. First, they changed a spec regarding the roof. The roof had been spec'd as being a certain two-ply roof, and the building committee wanted the option of putting up a one-ply roof with a 20-year warranty because we were going to put solar panels on it, which is the second ply. But they couldn't go put a one-ply system up there that was going to save about $500,000 without the board changing the ed spec, because the ed spec was very specific. So that was a specific case of, we think you can save money, we don't think there's going to be any detriment to quality, but the way you've written the ed spec is too narrow, you got to change it. So that was a big part of it. The second thing was that at that point in the game, the roof was needed to be awarded, the addition needed to be started, and there wasn't enough money potentially to complete the project. And so in order for the first selectman to award the contract to do the additions, the board had to say, and we weren't sure at that point, basically the board said, do as much of the windows as you can, funding, permitting, essentially, is what happened. At that point, the decision about the phasing had been decided. The Board of Ed was in a position where really they needed to change it so that the whole project could move forward. So it was up to funding availability, and that was what the change was. The Board of Ed wants the windows done, but they also wanted the other two phases done, and this was the most expedient way to make that happen.
And when was that? When were those decisions made about signing the contract and all that other
In
stuff?
November timeframe. I think it was a November Board of Ed meeting.
Yeah,
because
when
they were breaking
yeah.
ground in December, right?
Simply put, we sat down, coming out of the capital planning workshop, sat down with the building committee to clarification of where they were, because what I'd heard in July and August was different than what I heard in September. We had one additional bid. I think the roof was back at that point. Or was about to come back. They were looking at the other issues, and simply said, working with Twig Holland, Twig Holland, our director of purchasing, and myself make up the purchasing authority. We said, we're not signing any contracts relating to this unless all the funding's in place for 100% of the project.
And at that time, the decision was made to change the ed spec to make the windows and PCBs optional.
Up
This
to
way
the
you
amount
could
of the
sign
funding.
Up
contract.
to the amount of the funding.
Up to the amount of the funding. So
Right.
as many windows and PCBs, materials you can get out, up to the amount of the funding.
And if they hadn't done that, the entire project would have ground to a halt.
Okay.
So
Or was
that
there a way to take the windows and PCBs out of the project completely at this point in time? Or if that project started, some of the windows been replaced and the windows been ordered and PCB
No,
remediation
nothing's
needed?
happened with that. I think one of the reasons that part of the timing issue, getting back to Mike's point about that and Tom's point, was that there's such a holdup with the EPA. It's so difficult to forecast what the real cost of doing the PCB abatement and the window replacement project was, that nobody wanted to go forward with a number in December to say, hey, we need $2 million for these windows, when the EPA is still goofing around with exactly what they'll make us do. So I think at that point the decision was, scale this thing back, let's get this out, we have it through school facilities, and we actually can go out to bid on the window project and come back with a bid number and say, this project's already been bid, It's already been approved by the EPA, and this is what you need to finish the project. That's as close as you're ever going to get to a real number. And so I think that was also part of the reason why there wasn't a request at that point for additional funding, rather to do this, I guess, patch approach.
But I would suggest, you know, these questions are best answered by the building committee, as simple as I can say it.
When can you get it before us?
We'll take a look at scheduling that.
Next meeting? What's the next meeting, budget
We
meeting?
tried to get him here
For tonight.
for tonight, but the schedule didn't work out, and in fact, then their presentation to the Board of Selectmen was less than adequate.
We had
We're looking about
we had a
after
number
the
of
budget
questions.
process at this point in
I
time.
would think so, yes.
Uh,
We're looking in the April timeframe.
Because at this point in time, I think what's going to have to be considered is taking all of the money that was for the windows that's left and making the windows its own project. Because if you think I'm throwing more money into this project for somebody to make another ed spec change or something else to change, and now going to the roof or the expansion of the thing, it's not happening. So I think that the windows should be its own project. And I think it's been a valuable learning experience, this whole thing, not to put projects together. That we're on these projects for school buildings, we're going to have to put each one is going to live and die on its own. That we cannot put this group of money together because we have no control over it. And anybody's phasing, the building committee's phasing of whatever they want to do or what the board wants to do becomes its own phasing. And then we're left with pretty much the most sensitive thing for me is PCBs, because parents hear about PCBs and windows, and that becomes a real sensitive issue. And we can't control that at that point in time, because now it comes down to safety and legal requirements of having to do it. We can no longer say that we don't want to do there's not enough money for the expansion. Well, there's just not enough money.
Correct. Any more than on Riverfield, we could have said we're not going to do the gym.
Yep.
You know, any more than on Osborne Hill, once we identified the PCBs, we had to go through with the mitigation. You're absolutely correct. However, in terms of whether we separate out or how we do that, I think you're raising a number of good points. But I also would caution you, before jumping to an answer, why don't we hear from the building committee, fully learn the lessons from this time and design two things. One, what do we do with the rest of this project? But I also agree with your point about when we look going forward, very uncomfortable with how this came about and would not recommend and would not be in favor of doing it this way in the future.
Okay, I'm going to go to Dave Becker, who's been patient, then Mary, Bob, then John. Did I get that right? I got that. Close.
And I'll keep it short because we're going to hear about this again, and we've already got it.
Well, we've got plenty of
covered
time
quite-
tonight, so
quite a
you know,
lot. I
whatever
know,
you
right?
want to.
This hour, let's keep going. No, just this sort of just sums up like another sort of example of where I feel like sometimes we take an item that can be a couple $1,000s and we spend, you know, a long time, and we just spend a lot of time focusing on things, and then there's these $1 million items that sort of escape us for one reason or another, and it just, on my end, I find it to be a frustration, and I don't point it at any one in particular at this point. You know, you just happen to be in front of me, but it just, that's just it's a frustration, and I've expressed it before a couple of times with bonding items. They seem to kind of, it comes up. So, you know, let's obviously see how this plays out, get the building committee here, and, but it's frustrating to see.
Yeah, I think that this was a different approach, and we all agreed to try that. I think that unfortunately in this case, some of the lessons learned are we really would prefer not to do it again this way. I certainly am not comfortable with this approach.
Yeah, no,
And I
agreed
think
on that.
for the idea of how we combine these as well as the sequence we take, so.
Thank
So
you.
that's it, yeah.
Mrs. Leclerc.
Well, I'm pretty unhappy about this, and I think it's a misappropriation of funds, and I'd like a legal opinion on it, and possibly the building committee reports to you, you may want to stop the project before we spend further funds, because we should have the windows, and that was included in this conceptual plan. There's a specific budget that was attached to the resolution, and it specifically says windows. So they're supposed to do them, whether it's in the ed specs or not, and I think it's a serious problem. And so
That-
I want a written legal opinion about it.
Okay. The challenge is not whether they can do them because they're in the ed specs or not. The challenge is they don't have enough money to do them.
Yeah, but they changed the addition. It's a completely different addition that they're building, and they didn't come back to anyone. There wasn't supposed to be a separate addition in front of the building. We hired Silver Petrelli to do a report and a conceptual study, and they chose not to follow it.
Right? And as with any building committee, they're allowed to hire their architect and come back with their recommendation on that.
But if they change the project, they have to come back for more funding or approval.
They do.
And they didn't. They haven't been here in a year and a half.
Well, at this point, they don't need more funding to finish where they are. But you're asking for a legal opinion,
They do,
and
because we approve funds for that, and to get reimbursement, they're gonna have to attach our bond resolution to it that says they're gonna spend $3 million on windows.
I'm not sure that's a requirement for the reimbursement, but we'll take a look at that, certainly, and we will be happy to get you your legal opinion, because I think
would-
you've asked that a couple times, and I think that's reasonable that we answer that question.
Mr. Stone?
Obviously, this is getting to be a real big mess. We approved a certain amount of money for this, led to believe that that would complete the project, or, what it was. And I sort of agree with you. Matter of fact, I was thinking about this. It's about the building committee system that we have. And I personally have no faith in this building committee. I know they're good people, but they're not professionals in this thing. And it's just like, if you ask me what type of roof or whatever, I just don't know. And I think it's time that when you're talking about projects in the multi-million-dollar range, that you don't have volunteers doing it. I think you really need professionals to do this. It started with Osborne, with the 70,000 is now 400,000, which, obviously we don't have all the facts yet. We haven't had the building committee's report. But at this point, I don't have any faith in that committee or most of the other building committees. And I think we really have to rethink how we design this, how we do this. This is a lot of money, and you just can't rely on good-minded citizens who might have their own agenda, for instance, to do this. I think we really need to look at hiring professionals.
Yeah, I think there were several lessons learned on that. One, and again, just to remind everybody, we approved this dollar amount, this budget, before we appointed the building committee. So they didn't develop this number. They were handed this number. All right, so when you go back and look at the numbers, I'm not sure we necessarily ever had the buy-in. But the other issue is, as these projects get more complex, and as we get into things with the EPA, with PCBs, with some of the additional complexity, it takes a lot more time. All right, and as volunteers, they don't necessarily have the time to devote to the projects when we need it, when they're at a critical point. So I think that at some point we're realizing that's an unfair request to make to people, as this board well knows, because you can plan ahead of time for budget season, but if somebody said you had to meet, 2 times a week in October, that might be a difficult challenge because you haven't arranged your schedule that way. The building committees, on the other hand, don't necessarily have that guidance. They're not sure when they're going to be needed based on what comes up during the meetings.
And we're also having trouble filling these building committees, I think.
That's also correct.
These are volunteers, and it's hard to find qualified people. We can get bodies, but you really need the right people on these committees, or don't have the committees, and change the system, change the way we do it on these multi-million-dollar complex projects, as you were saying.
Thank you. Mr. Mottola?
Just a couple of things. When I was on the Board of Ed, we did change ed specs on occasion, but it wasn't that we were asking a building committee to add to a project. It was always a reduction of something in the ed spec because of money. So I never saw it the other way around. I think the challenge with respect to the building committees is, my understanding is a state statute to get reimbursement requires that we have to have a building committee of some sort. So
That's also my understanding.
right. So that's an issue. I was on one building committee that built 2 schools, and it really worked well at the time. I don't think things have changed that much where it can't work. I don't know why things have gone awry over a few times over the last few years. I think one of the things that we did, if I recall correctly, is that, and I'm probably using the incorrect term, but we had like a czar project manager. We hired Pinnacle, if I remember correctly, that was overseeing
An owner's rep.
Owner's rep. That is, I think, really something that we need to maybe do with these projects. But Mike, we don't have an employee on the town side who fills that role. Is that correct?
No, and I think one of the issues is, again, as they get more complex, you need more hours in. And at different times, you need somebody to be there during the day. And volunteers are generally better at meeting a nighttime meeting schedule as opposed to a day schedule. I think the second thing is we get constrained by how many people we have to have on it. And we could actually, I think, be seriously consider and be more effective with a smaller building committee of professionals that are on staff and working as opposed to 9, 10, or 11 volunteers that have to meet once a month at night.
Yeah. Okay. I have other things, but I'm not going to get into it right now. I'd wait for the building committee to come. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Mr. Brown.
Do you know, Mike, if the original architects that came up with the pricing are still involved with the project? Silver, Petrocelli, and so.
Yeah.
You need me?
Please.
If you know the answer.
They were not selected by the building committee to be the architects of record. They were not interviewed by the building committee. They never presented to the building committee, so they were not involved in the project. Their involvement with this project ended when they turned over the conceptual study. That's what they were paid for. So they had no future involvement in the project whatsoever.
They came up with the pricing?
Yes.
So
you heard them. They presented. I mean, they
used their pricing?
Yeah, we used their pricing to price out the project.
I wonder what we paid them, because they were completely off.
Well, I'm not sure that that's...
Yeah, I think at some point having this discussion without the building committee here doesn't serve a purpose, because you're getting,
Just wondering if we're still using these. I mean, this is where
I think
the bonding
the answer is no.
The answer is no. On the other hand, I will point out, and although this project isn't perfect either, but we used the same firm for Osborne Hill. Same process, gave them a number, gave it to the building committee. Now, they went over, forget the walkway for a minute, just the regular project. They went over, as you saw, a couple, 300,000 for things that were way out of their control. They hired that architectural firm, and they basically came, within a few percentage points of hitting the number.
This same one?
The same one, right. And then the building committee then hired them to do the project. Now, there was no obligation to do that, but they interviewed them and determined that they were the best ones for the job, and they would have the ownership of those numbers because they put them together. That project was very close, and that had a lot of variables in it because PCB mitigation is all over the place. So I don't think it's necessarily, you had a situation where the same architectural firm developed estimates and the project was real close. And then you had another time where they developed an estimate and the project went way over. So there's probably lessons in here one way or the other, and you can't tell the building committee who to hire. That's part of the process, and the town has its procurement process, and they have to follow that. But I'm not sure I want to lay this on the feet of the architect who did the conceptual study quite so quickly.
Okay.
Mr. Becker, you had your hand up. Did you have
Yeah,
something?
no, just on the building committee side, and I'm thinking back a couple of years to the committee that you and I served on, that you had formed. The building, there's some latitude there with these committees. It doesn't necessarily, I mean, you could take it and it could be, 2 people who work for the town, or it could be the Board of Selectmen, and then goes out and you guys basically hire off on everything. I mean, it does not need to be the way we've been doing it. So,
Correct. The last time I looked into it, you could have a wide range of folks, but you could have a very small building committee of 3 or 4 or 5 professionals. It might be some people from the Board of Ed, so their input is there. Some people from the town, so their input is there.
So obviously, at this point, the hour is growing, but that maybe is a conversation that the board should.
We're definitely going to have that conversation.
Yeah, no, it's worthwhile at this point.
You all set, Mr.
I'm
Cook?
good, thanks.
Question, then if everyone else is done. Does the administration have a representative on the building committee?
And,
Town administration. Who represents the administration at the
yeah, no, we
meetings?
don't.
Does
We've
somebody
got,
from the administration
we've got
regularly
Judy
attend?
Ewing, who sits in on the meetings and gives me updates as to what's going on, so I get a report from her on that. And at certain key points, Director of Purchasing is involved.
So are there reports issued on what happens at the building committee?
You
So
mean
that-
like minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah, the building committees do produce minutes.
And do you get a separate report on that from your
I
person?
get some highlights of that from Ms. Ewing, yes.
Are those written or are those verbal?
A little of both, actually, based on the issue and based on what's taken place.
Yeah. Okay. So here, this is interesting because before we were talking about the bond resolutions and a very narrow scope of influence of the Board of Finance, right? Now we're talking about a bond resolution that, as Mrs. Leclerc points out, has a very specific terms at the back of it. And it would seem in this issue, we're saying that building committees have much more power than elected officials when it comes to how those funds are spent.
Actually, in certain cases, that's actually my understanding. And I think that's why I'm looking at, I think we've reached the point where we need to take a look at how we do this. Our projects are just much bigger and more complex than they were.
So can I see the charter? Because when I looked through the charter, I didn't see, and I might have just missed it. And I did a number of years ago, 8 years ago as a fact, serve on a committee on building committees. But I might have missed it in here where the charter points out what the powers of a building committee are. Do we have that? Mr. Lesser, it's not in the...
Yeah. I believe it's governed by state statute, not
And
the
that's-
charter.
Yeah, and I'd like to see that. If we could pull that up, if somebody could pull that up for us and see exactly what those powers are. Because what does concern me, and by the way, I will agree, that we've done certain building committees where, you know, for example, when we redid Tomlinson or when we redid Stratfield School, right? It was a big project, and they had to make trade-offs through the course of the project. And obviously, in the course of those projects, they need the latitude to do that and not come back, right? This, as Mrs. Leclerc points out, has 3 distinct phases on it. And I guess probably why people are sensitive to the windows, because we've been hearing about these damn windows for about 9 years.
Right, exactly.
Right? So I think in this particular instance, this was a key element of the project that is again gone by the boards. And
It was also fully researched by town facilities at one point.
right, years ago. That's
Right.
absolutely correct.
And then the Board of Ed combined the projects together.
Right, because we had the roof issue, because they had the overcapacity issue, or the undercapacity issue. So it was put all together, and then they had the PCB concerns. So it is concerning that that was kind of just thrown overboard. I'll be particularly upset if it was thrown overboard because we made design changes that greatly increased the cost of the building over what we originally thought we were funding. And I might just
Yeah,
have to
and-
live with
And my
that.
caution would be, just before you get too
I'm not.
upset.
I'm not upset.
Let's, okay, you're right, you said you would be upset.
Correct.
Before you would be upset, I
Right.
suspect it makes sense to get to the folks that actually know the answers to those.
Right.
And that's the building committee.
Right. And so that's what
And
you
since
guys
the
are
Board of
gonna
Selectmen didn't get to finish our discussion with them,
hear. Right. Did you talk about the change in architects at all, or any of that in your meeting?
not during the discussion that we had, which was not, frankly, all that long at the time, because our basic questions weren't answered, so it didn't really make sense to go beyond that. We
Got
wanted
it.
to give them time to come back with both the answers after they understood our questions and appropriate documentation to show us what took place.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I look forward to hearing from that. I look forward, if, Mr. Lesser, if you can help us with the state statute on that as to how that's defined, that'd be very interesting to see. And I think Mrs. Leclerc raises a very valid point as to what does this do? Because when you go back and you look at the original bonding resolution versus what we got, there's going to be a large inconsistency there. And what does that mean? Maybe nothing. I don't know. I think it's very valid.
Something.
Any other questions on this? All right, thank you, and we look forward to scheduling that meeting. I'm going to ask for a 5-minute break. I'm sorry, Mr. Vahey, but we need a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll hear from the town. Go to item number 3/now 4 on the agenda, which is to review the current status of the town's pension and OPEB funds. And for our new members, we have 2 reports on our investments in both OPEB, which stands for post-employment benefits, right, and the pension. Other post-employment benefits means other than pensions. Right? All right. Glad I got that right. And I'm looking for the reports. We have Mr. Vahey here, who chairs our Pension and OPEB Investment Committee. Thank you for being here, sir. And we have the 2 reports from Callan in front of us. The first one is the OPEB report, and the second one is the pension report. Welcome, Mr. Vahey. Thank you for being here so late tonight.
Glad to be here. See you again.
You're such a good liar. Let's turn our attention to the OPEB report.
So the OPEB report shows we're at about $21 million, which across some very simplistic investments because it is only $21 million.
Mr. Vahey, that raises a question for me. Should we, I know you're going to say, or we're going to say they're not policy, they're guidelines relating to the investment guidelines that you guys adhere to. One of those is not holding so much funds with any given investment advisor over another, right? But for this fund, because it's quote-unquote a low balance at $20 million, we have a concentration of risk with a couple of different funds. Now, I'm not questioning the funds or any of that. But my question is, at what point do you start to diversify even further? What's the dollar level of investment available that you'll start to diversify further?
Most asset managers are not going to allow us. 10 million is usually a threshold. I mean, we did on our fixed income side, though, we did leverage the pension fund. So Wells manages that underneath the same mandate, and I think this is the same fees, which was nice of them. So I mean, that would generally where I would expect it, and depending on what the contribution is in the coming year and what the markets do, we could be looking at changing some of that up. And I would imagine the first place you would see it would be in the breaking out some of the stock funds the way we have them in the pension fund.
But we got a ways to go before we'll be able to address really that concentration risk on a percentage basis, correct?
Yeah, and we don't really have any concentration. I mean, unless you have some fear of that Vanguard.
No, I don't. I'm just asking the question because we had talked about 10%, but no, I don't have that fear. Please continue if I cut you off. I didn't mean to.
Nope. The last page of the OPEB shows the performance for the last, well, and this is also year-end. Don't have January's in hand, so this is both of these are for year-end 2014. We have last month, fiscal year to date, 12 months and 36-month returns. You can see that for the 12-month period, it's about 6%. And, you know, December was international stocks took a little bit of a beating, even though U.S. equities kind of had a late Santa rally, but whatever. We was roughly down 1% for the month. And hopefully things get a little better for the fiscal year, because right now it's basically flat.
Do we have questions on this report from board members? Go ahead, Mr. Becker.
Thank you. So, actually, along the similar lines to the chairman's question, isn't there a way, though, to leverage this fund against, basically to use the leverage of the pension fund to diversify out this fund if we wanted to, and get away from those minimums? there's no way to go to them? I mean, they're separate from accounting
It's not accounting.
standpoint, but
Nope, we
Gonna
did it where we
treat it-
could. There are certain, investment managers have thresholds, and so we could do it. We would pay it through the nose. So, and also there's certain minimums, just like when you open up an investment account and some funds say you need a $2,500 minimum to open up a whatever, or $500 for an IRA. Same thing happens in the institutional space.
so there's no way to go to them and say, well, we've already got $20 million in your fund. We're giving you a $21 million amount. Keep the books separate on those two allocations that we've given you.
Actually, the IRA example I gave to you is very apropos because these are they have to be treated separately. There's no, I could have $200,000 with Vanguard and another fund and say, well, can I just open up an IRA with 100 even though it's a 250 minimum? Because they'd say, no, sorry, we would love to, but they don't do called side agreements or for things like that. So the only place we did leverage it where we could, which was the fixed income side. So
Yep. Okay.
and I don't know that it would really be any beneficial with fees and everything else. I mean, you've got a nice 60-40 split, basically, fixed income and stocks. And in the stock side, you have international and domestic. The only downside to not having the diversification is it's more volatile.
Exactly.
So you could actually, for a while, this one was slightly outperforming the pension one because it has a little bit more stock exposure than the 64 because there's not the alternatives in there. So, but if you look, if you want to compare them side by side, you'll see that equity exposure hurt a little bit. So when it went down, so I think pension was down, 0.6%? 0.7. So, but anyway, they track each other, and we will, someday it will look something more like this, I would imagine, because they have the same investment performance standards.
Are you good, Mr. Becker?
Yep. No. Good.
Let's
Thank
go
you.
on to anybody else on OPEB.
How much approximately are we putting in OPEB on a yearly, fresh cash are you getting in every year?
That's not a question for me.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, we do, whoops, excuse me. Yeah, we prepare cash flow and internal balance sheets now, but I don't know
I
those
just can't remember what the budget amount was
numbers
last
off
year.
the top of my head. We allocate a certain amount, and then the balance at the end of the year goes into the fund, because the amount that we allocate is also used to pay the claims. But yeah, it's like $9 million is the allocation, approximately, per year. In fact, it's about the same this year, actually. I think it's like $8,950,000. That's my recollection.
So to our point, it'll be a few years.
It's grown pretty fast. I
Yeah,
mean,
a couple of years at $9 million, you're going to be up there.
But the claims come out of that.
How much is approximately the claims out of the $9 million?
That would be, hold on, I think I might be able to tell you that. You have the internal service.
Don't act so surprised.
Yeah, I know. Must be in the active, the portion. Yeah. It's this. No, you're right, because it's got both of them in.
Or while they look for that.
Why don't we go on to the pension?
Yeah, exactly. Are there any other questions while they look for that? Yeah.
So I understand what Jim was saying. So we budget around $9 million a year. We pay claims out of that, and whatever we have left over, we invest in this.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Anything else? Okay, seeing none, let's go to
They might have a number.
pension. Do you have a number?
So the contributions last year was employer and plan members, $9,500,000. $4 million of that was spent on benefits, and $5.4 million was added to the fund balance.
So $5 million. So we got a few more years, and then we can diversify the holdings a little bit more. Okay. Mr. Vahey, let's go on to the pension. Thank you.
Pension side, we're around $355 million. And the returns, as you can see, closely mimic, at least for the most recent periods, the OPEB. On a year basis, commodities had a huge sell-off. Oil would be the most pronounced, but in general, it was a rough year for commodities. We still have not, we're gradually funding our private equity mandate, and matter of fact, we're having, I think we're going to have Mesro on the phone for our next meeting because they've been rather slow in ramping up their funding. Real estate had a great year. And then, the equity markets, it was a good year. Our managers did pretty well for the type of market they were, that we were in, and fixed income, had pretty decent returns, despite what everyone thought going into the year. So,
Now, the rate of return assumed in our actuarial assumptions, 7.25%?
7.5.
I thought we ratcheted it down to 7.25%.
it went from 7.75 to 7.5.
And then are we heading towards 7.25%?
We're not due for another. That was part of our 4 or 5 year.
Yeah, right.
But, and I'm trying to remember when our next one, where we stand on that. I think we're probably about 3 years in.
That's correct. And also, I've asked both Cohen Resnick and Hooker and Holcomb to put together schedules for us based on their client load as to where other people are. When we looked at this a year ago, 7.5 was certainly the mode and more above than below, but,
Right. They're also, because of our financial statements, they need to do a, as I recall, sensitivity analysis on the returns on this, correct?
yes.
What that does to our obligation. I mean, I don't want to, I'm not quote-unquote panicking here, but we're
Oh, you,
point and
you-
a half or so below what the assumption is in the actuarial models, correct? Just for this year.
yes.
Well, last fiscal year, we were above it.
We were way above, right.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Which is
the
why-
last 3 years, on a calendar year basis, you could see. I mean, so
Go ahead.
it's typical snapback from, we had a bad period, so now the market's been pumped up with liquidity. So, I mean, I don't know where returns are going to be, but when you do your rolling averages or whatever, and taking into account the, from the 2007 to 2008 time frame, and blend those in over 10-year rolling periods, it really didn't. If you look at a 90-year sort of return horizon, it only moved things very slightly. So that whole assumption of whatever 60-40 split gets you somewhere in the vicinity of 7 to 8%, still intact. I'm not pushing it one way or the other, and I've suggested other stuff, but that's not
Yeah,
for
I
this
think-
meeting.
We just want to be careful about it, that's all, and we want to monitor it. Any other questions? Comments, concerns, anyone? Does anybody new, first time seeing this schedule, have any questions you want to ask on the schedule? I'm not trying to point anybody out, I'm just,
There's one other item, too. We had talked, last time I was here, we talked that a change that was coming through, and it actually is reflected here. We diversified the fixed income exposure,
yep.
which I think Ken's not here now. Now he actually joined our board, but I think it made him very happy, Mr. Brockfield. So we have, you'll see the global fix. So fixed income now is that's 2/3 domestic, 1/3 global.
Please point out to Mr. Brockfield that your returns before he joined the board were better.
You may get to say that to him directly, because I said, well, now that he's on the board, he could maybe do some of these since he knows you all so well.
All right, any other questions, comments? Seeing not anything from the public? Mr. Caliper, I know you sit on the board. Thank you very much, appreciate it.
Thank you.
See you next month, or next quarter. All right. Item number 4/5, to review the Board of Education Q2 FY15 financial position. Dr. Tittle, Ms. Mansell, good evening. Once again.
Hi.
This is a lot less exciting than the other topics.
Yes. Let's hope so.
I know. Not exciting. No news is good news on our front. So you have, I think, the documents that the Board of Ed got on the quarterly financial report as of December 31st, 2014.
Correct.
And we are expecting to be able to deposit the $700,000 in the salary account into the medical retention fund. Taking that into account, we're still expecting to finish the year in the black.
Do you have a projection of how much besides that you might finish in the black or no?
Right now, we have no other sources of surplus. So we're projecting ourselves to finish at zero with that 700 taken out. That can change. We've had a lot of recent expenses with respect to heat, snow removal, ice removal, and so we still have a lot of uncertainty there. The special education fund is behaving itself this year, but that can always change on a dime.
Talk to us about that, because quite honestly, I was trying to rationalize or understand the pupil personnel expense.
Yes.
Which is the only category that's well over budget. And as good as your
Right.
commentary was, I was having trouble kind of following what's going on there. And
Well-
is that a function of accruals, or is it a function of actual expense?
It's a function of the fact that we've not gotten our excess cost payment from the state. So we have to carry these large negative balances, and then when the state makes its excess cost payment, those revert to normal-looking numbers. So it's scary right now. But in fact, the news from the state, again, that news came out after this report was done, was that the state is going to be reimbursing us a larger percentage of special ed excess costs than we had budgeted. And so
Because they're so flush with funds, I guess.
well, there's a couple things that happen. One is that, and I think, we're very, very good at claiming costs for every possible child and every possible expense. That ended up with 22 additional students most of whom are in district, who qualified for excess costs. So our costs were already baked in. It wasn't like an outplacement where we had to pay the first $70,000. So that really helped us. Plus, the state, for whatever reason, maybe they didn't have as many claims, but it's the state excess cost is a fixed sum of money. And whatever the district claim, you get that on a prorated basis. And right now, they're expecting to pay out about 82%, and we budgeted 75. So those two things.
So what's the number?
We'll see by May. What's that?
What's the number then?
What's
So
the-
we're down here by 2.7 million. What number are you getting back from the state?
Right, so we're looking at, Doreen.
$4,040,000.
And what was budgeted to get back?
Budgeted 2.7. We used last year's number.
So so some of the costs have gone up, so you've
Yes.
incurred more cost,
Exactly.
right?
It's reimbursement, so you have to incur the cost. You're being reimbursed a percentage of what
Right,
you
but you're
incur.
getting reimbursed at a higher percentage. So
Yes.
theoretically, the percentage delta should be more.
Right.
That should result in quote-unquote excess dollars coming back that weren't budgeted.
We should be in better shape to cover some of the overages we typically have in these accounts than we ever have.
So that implies that there'll be more funds available to give back to the town, no?
I wouldn't go that far, because the other thing that happens is they make an adjustment on the filing in March, and if they have a big run of claims, then they will reduce that percentage, and they will adjust it for the second payment. So we can't make any assumptions about what the state's going to give us. Let's just say we budget conservatively until we see the money.
Right, so what happens with the excess?
So what happens with the excess is, of course, it goes to covering the costs that caused. In other words, if we have, for example,
Okay, but there's a difference. I
yeah,
understand.
we incur extra costs in order to get the reimbursement.
But that's not, there's a difference between incurring extra cost
Right.
and getting a higher percentage of a refund than you thought. You
Right.
incur extra cost, it says you spent more money due to extra cost, right? That money's gone.
Right.
Right? So if you get 75% of that back as you budgeted, you're fine, right?
Well, you don't get 75% of that back.
Okay, what do you get back?
You get back, if it's a outplaced student, you get back, you get 75% of the amount in excess of 4.5 times your per pupil expenditure. You should get back 100%, but the state never fully funds it. So that's where the 75% comes in. So a child gets outplaced for $100,000. Say 4.5 times per pupil expenditure is 70. You should get back 30 from this. 100% reimbursement would be 30, but you don't get 30. You get 75% of 30. You don't get 75% of 100. So you still have to eat the first 4.5 times for every outplacement.
So you're saying of the 22 students,
But for of the 22 students, any of them that are within the district, the extent to which they go over the 4.5 times, you'll get 75% of that. So you might have a student who is in the district, and when we add up all the expenses for educating that student in the district, that student comes to $80,000. We get back 75% of 10, 7,500 of that. So it's not quite the windfall it might appear. When you hear 75%, you're talking about 75% above that threshold.
I heard 82%.
Or 82% above the
Which is
threshold,
70.
exactly, right.
We budgeted at 75.
We budgeted 75, and we're projecting 82 once the state, comes in at the end.
I guess what I'm asking
Yeah.
is, I'd almost like to see like a roll forward of the ins and outs of this, to say
Yep.
at the end of the year, right?
Right.
How do we stand on this one account vis-à-vis what either comes back to the town or doesn't come back? You get the 700, and I'm just wondering, if we budgeted 75% of a number.
Right.
To get back, whatever, right, 75 of the excess.
Of the
right?
excess, right,
And we're getting 82%.
right,
Okay,
That's-
there's a delta there that's a number.
right,
Could be large, could be whatever it is, right?
Right.
7%.
right, 7% of X.
Okay, so you had excess costs. Did that
Right.
excess cost eat up all the 7%? Did the excess cost eat up part of that 7%, so some of that excess is there and
Right.
available? Did the excess cost not even blew way through the 7%, and then you had to take cuts from other areas to fund it? That's
Right.
kind of what I'm interested in.
Yeah, no, I understand. It's typically, special ed, as a general rule, tends to overexpend their budget through no fault of their own. And so, but we can provide that. It's something, and look, I'm not being, facetious about this, but we don't expect to be able to have a surplus at the end of the year, but it could happen. I mean, we know we don't want to cut it that close, so we would try to, navigate things in. We're not looking to do excessive spending with anything that comes in, but most of the time, the special ed budget goes over, and anything we get on extra excess cost would go to offset the special ed overages.
Yeah, I get it. I'm just looking at the overage here of $1.3 million.
That's the outside number. We'll see if we really get that.
Understand, but I'm saying, okay, start there and say, where did that
Where'd it go?
1.3 go?
Yes, I understand.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
That's all I'm
Yeah.
asking. Does other questions? I didn't mean to monopolize that part of the conversation. Mr. Walsh?
Where do we stand with how you're dealing with the internal service fund for how the claims are coming in this year?
Well, the most recent data, I think, did you get that in through December experience? I think you have that
That was
page.
forwarded at one point, yeah, a while ago. Yeah.
I think it was in the material that we sent out.
It was in the packet.
It's in the packet. The claims experience deteriorated between November and December compared to the prior rolling 12 months. So we're a little bit farther behind than we were, but we're in much better shape, obviously, than we were, say, not 10 months ago. We were looking at a $1.5 million deficit. We are also anticipating, although it's taking a lot of twists and turns, that we will be able to make the $160,000 contribution from the security funds once we get the bonding squared away for that. So, we're going to be adding $860,000 this year into that fund from Board of Ed funds. So we'll just keep an eye on it. It's smoothed out, but we did budget to sort of do no harm to the top line. And when the board saw the deterioration before they voted on their budget, they added an additional $293,000 into that for next year's budget to keep it whole.
That's before the deterioration? that you saw?
Actually, what happened was I built my budget based on November experience.
Okay.
And between the time I brought the budget forward and the Board of Ed voted on it, we got the December experience. And so what they did was they took, actually what turned out to be savings from the pension that also came in, and they moved it over to the Internal Service Fund to shore up the deterioration here. So they did take action because there was one more month of experience that happened between the time I did the budget and the time they finished the budget. And there'll be 2 more months before you guys get it. So I'm optimistic things will look better 2 months from now because there were 2 horrible months that are going to come off.
So this negative 1.2, if you add in the 860, you're closer to a negative 360,000, 340,000, somewhere in that neighborhood, correct?
Where are you on
Net
this, Tom?
profit and loss for the year.
Right.
So it's the 1.2 minus the 860. So it's 340 if you do the 208. It's 350 negative for the year for you guys.
We're anticipating now that we will be negative at the end of this year, 447. Right, Doreen?
You're looking at the way,
I'm looking
you know,
at
our
the other
schedule.
one.
the
Oh, I'm
town
sorry. You on
one.
a different one?
Yeah, I am.
Oh,
It's-
okay.
It's your numbers, it's just in a different.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's in a different format. Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Different format.
I know. We do them like 3 different ways,
know.
right? Right,
Yeah,
okay.
okay.
Yep.
So
They're
the-
within spitting distance of
That
each other.
includes
Yeah.
that 860.
Got it.
Yeah, that includes the 860.
Yeah,
The 1.2 includes the 860?
yes.
Yes.
If you look at their schedule, Tom,
Yeah, I got this one.
right,
Okay, I don't see it here. So it's 1.2, so this is whole, so it's not an additional 860.
correct.
Yeah, that 860.
Even with the 860, we're down the 333,
Right,
okay, or the 447.
right. But since we were looking at 1.5 million not
okay.
that long ago, we're.
I got excited there for a couple of minutes.
I know. Well, we were, when we did the budget, when I brought the budget forward in November, based on that 700 being in there, and without the 160, we had whittled that thing down to about 140.
Yeah.
And then we were thinking, the 160 is going to come in, we've wiped it out. We're back to even. And then we had a bad month of experience and cycled back. So if you look at our November column, that was down to 144, and that didn't even have the 160 in it.
Got it.
So we had gotten the thing right where it needed to be for a brief shining moment. And then fate intervened.
Mr. Walsh, any other questions on your item? That's it.
We're managing it.
Okay, any other questions? Mrs. Leclerc?
Just a quick one. When you say it's through the December experience, what are the claims in there through? Do you know?
The claims through December.
It includes all the.
Yeah, so it would be, that would actually be the whole calendar year then, right? It's the 12 months, it's a 12-month rolling claim. So what they do is they shut the door December 31st. It takes them a couple weeks to do it. They do a 12-month look back from there. So that's actually through December 31st, 2014, right? That's what that means.
The paid claims.
Paid claims, right. Thank you.
Any,
And then, could I,
sorry.
one other?
Absolutely.
And then you have new contracts that change the health
Yes.
benefits a little bit. Do you expect any changes?
So when Aon does the projections, they took the previous 12 months claims, and then they add the 9% trend factor. Then they subtract out the savings we got from the teacher's contract, and that's built into their projections. We couldn't put anything in for the administrator's contract because that's still in arbitration. So that's not in here anywhere. And once arbitration's finished, we can then add that into the next month when they do a projection. So basically, they added 9% because that's the trend. Then they backed out the 800,000 in savings, and that's the basis of the projection for 15-16. So yes, their plan design changes are included in the projections for next year's budget because that's when they go into effect.
And you don't see any changes in your experience, like more or less?
If I could predict that, I wouldn't be in this job. No, I mean, you look back, and, because what happens is, so when they do the January claims, a month's going to come off the other end. So your claims may have stayed exactly the same, but if it's a really good month coming off the back end, it looks like your experience deteriorated. And that's why I'm saying, I think this is about when it all sort of went downhill last year, and January and February were really bad for paid claims. That's when, if you remember, we went from, the Board of Ed kind of had a balanced thing, and then by the time you saw it, it was like, oh my God, you're $1.5 million in the hole. So that's why my hypothesis, looking at my science colleague, my hypothesis is that things will improve, but that all depends on how the claims are in January and February of this year versus the month it's going off the back end.
Anything else?
Where
Mr.
do we
Walsh?
stand with the arbitration for the administrator's contract? Are we going to have a resolution to that before we have to vote on it at the Board of Finance on the budget?
Yes, we are expecting a decision by the arbitration panel within the next week. That decision is filed with the town clerk. At that point, there is another chance for the RTM to reject that and send it to a second look arbitration. If they're not satisfied with it, within 25 days, the RTM could reject that and send it back and pay for another arbitration itself. If they don't do that or they don't take any action, then that is final after 25 days. So the answer would be yes. However, if they, on the 25th day, they vote to send it back to another review, then you might not have it back by the time you vote. It all depends on how long it takes them to make up their minds. Even there, that's a pretty quick turnaround. But it's very rare. You have to have a 2/3 vote of the RTM to reject it and send it to a second panel, and the town has to pay all the costs of it.
The town's paying all the costs for the arbitration?
Of the second, if the
Of the
if
first
the
one.
RTM, the first arbitration, the costs are being split between the Board of Ed and the Administrators Association.
Okay. Dr. Tuttle, at the end of this first arbitration, when we get this award back,
Yes.
would you be able to total all of the costs?
We are doing it. We are
To the
keeping
penny.
tabs to the penny.
Okay.
Or to the
Oh,
dollar.
And the town will be able to do the same thing?
Well, the town doesn't incur any costs for
Okay,
this.
you just
Board of Ed
bill
is
them for
paying,
half
the
the cost.
the Board of Ed, the RTM took the action, the Board of Ed incurs all the costs.
Okay.
Point of order on that. We actually spent extensive time in our finance department, so as much as we're not out of pocket money,
Oh, yes,
we're out of pocket time, big time.
that's a good
To the
point.
extent that you can summarize what that time is?
Yeah.
That'd be good to know as well.
Right. Mr. Mayor had to spend a lot of time on this because he had to testify and so forth.
Okay.
So that's a good point.
And these costs that you will give us will not only be the cost for attorney's fees, but I know you needed experts on each one of these issues and things like
Right.
that. It'll be the cost for all of those experts, everything.
We are tallying it up.
Okay.
We've been requested numerous times to do that, so we are keeping
Excellent.
track.
I think it'd be a good exercise for this body to know what those
Yes.
costs are for an
Do you know your
arbitration.
costs to date?
I don't know because there's a lag in the attorney billings.
Ballpark?
We had estimated that the total costs were going to run somewhere between $50,000 and $60,000 for out-of-pocket additional legal and expert fees. That was our initial estimate. But, you know, we have to wait until the final bills come in.
I agree with what all of you were saying. Can we get a nice report in writing on what the costs are? In big bold letters, please? That's all I have to say.
Okay, any other
I
questions?
think it's been requested by people. We are keeping track. As soon as we have a firm figure, we will let everybody know, as well as the result of the arbitration will be public as soon as it's filed with the town clerk.
Thank you. Questions, comments, concerns, board members? Anything else on the Board of Education's report? Anything from the public? Seeing none, thank you. Thanks for staying late tonight.
Thanks for Q&A.
All right, at this point, we're going to go to item number 6. Item number 5, which is number 6, to review the town Q2 fiscal year 2015 financial position. Mr. Mayor, good evening. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to turn the floor over to the clerk of the board, who's going to take us through this.
Go right ahead.
We could start with the summary sheet. I think that's probably the best place to start, and then we could drill down if need be. As you can see, we're estimating an estimated variance of 608, which does not include the 500 that's budgeted for surplus. That, to me, wouldn't be a variance because we budgeted for it. As you can see, we have about 800,000 on positive for the revenue side. These are the major drivers of that. We can go down and talk about any one of them if you want. We have a wealth of knowledge sitting in the back of the room. So if anyone does have any questions on any specific lines, we could go over those. But a lot of this you guys saw on the first quarter. We've introduced a little bit on the taxes. Well, that's what's known so far. That's a comfortable number for us. We don't know anything different. So about 360 or so favorable there. Conveyance, we've received a number from the town clerk, the 185, due to the real estate market. Ticket for parking we saw in first quarter. We've updated the state revenue to include any information that we've received from the state. So that's a positive 183. Park and Rec down 215, primarily to Penfield. A little bit on the golf course side, and then you guys have seen the 338 on the business interruption and the 46 from the resolution that you guys voted on to kind of close out some old projects. Does anyone have any questions on the revenue pieces? There's clearly more detail on the revenue sheet that meets these are all the accounts that meet the criteria of the 10,000 and the 10% variance.
Questions from board members on revenue at this point? Seeing none, go right ahead.
Okay. Expense side, unemployment comp, again, it's a little bit, we saw about a negative 170 number. Now that's down to 122, primarily from the public school lunch stuff that we've talked about in Q1. Heart and hypertension, positive 150, due to some initiatives that have been in place for a while. Police, negative 125. Public Works, a negative 325. All other little pluses and minuses are kind of netting out to a positive 50. And then on the vacancy piece, it's about 170 or so, given the vacancies to date that we're projecting. We know that some are going to be filled, or some have been filled after the December timeframe, but that was the department head's estimate on the favorability due to vacancies.
Can we talk a bit about police and then Public Works?
Yep.
Then I know we have people in the back of the room. Do the guys from Public Works want to come up?
Public Works or police, whoever.
Hey, guys.
How are you tonight?
Thanks for staying up late tonight. I know it's been a long couple of weeks for you guys. So,
Just a
yeah.
point of reference on the Public Works piece, knowing that it was a kind of a favorable number as of the end of December due to the storms being late starting in the season. I did work with Mr. Bartlett on getting this is not a actual number as of December. This is hey, we know that there's been storms after that. Can we get any update to this? So that is the only one variance on here that's not an actual December number. We looked at storms through, I think, February 11th or so.
Yes.
To get a more accurate projection.
So you didn't want to show us that we're running a positive when in fact we're in a negative
I wanted to,
position.
instead of waiting for the third quarter, to kind of get this negative out there now, so that I could say in the third quarter, I already told you about this.
Yeah, this is your
So-
subsequent event footnote. That's
So.
what it is. All right. Talk to us about what's going on.
Well, basically, literally half the number is snow-related. Materials, overtime, and as Caitlin says, it's really a 2.5-quarter budget, not a full 2-quarter. I commented at the end of the second quarter on some line items that we were in good shape if the winter didn't break bad for us, and I think I personally caused the polar vortex to hit Fairfield, because as soon as I said that, it seemed like we started getting storms. So to Caitlin's point, we said, let's give you some real information. So the things outside of snow are isolated to UI rates that were not projected. There was an increase. We're projecting a net negative by the end of the budget at 74,000 there. I think the other one is buildings and grounds. We're expecting about 50,000 there. And I would say
What's causing the buildings and grounds?
it's just virtually every project just has a slight uptick to it, and the aggregate total's running, over. 50 is as good a number as I can assign to it, but I can assure you we've cut things back. Right now, we're like 30 in the hole, and I'm trying my best not to end up at 50 in the hole, but I felt from looking at some of the invoices and where we are with the cold, temperatures, that I think we are, run the possibility of going a little deeper. We're just incurring a lot with our HVAC people. Furnaces are being worked on. I mean, we have some old equipment, and when it's failing, I'm not going to not turn the heat on for the people. So it's a sad number, but it's a realistic number.
Other questions? How much of this are you going to, Scott, or Joe, is this the net number you think you're going to come over? Or are you going to be able to cover this with transfers within your budget?
I don't believe we can cover.
Well, once again, snow is a different factor, but
agreed.
So, we'll know a lot more as the year goes on, but hopefully our plan is to cover all the non-snow related items within the operating budget.
And how much are we over on snow? So of this 325, how much of that is snow related? 310?
Over 50% of the number. For a quick example, we budgeted 3,000 tons of salt. The last year's number was 57.76. Before the snow flew, the salt went up $15.50 a ton. So that put me at a negative of 46,000 right there, just to budget the 3,000 ton. I've already purchased 3,500 tons, so I'm over another 500 ton at the high number of $73 a ton. So my materials alone is 83,000 in the hole. Now, again, if we can pick some of that up, as Joe says, we will try to pick some of that up. But the things that concern me from an operating perspective is all the time we're now putting on snow, things like Jennings Beach renovations are being halted. That doesn't mean my material goes up, but what it means is things like my overtime, because I'm losing time on those jobs. If the snow breaks clean and I can get back in there in March and April, then maybe we don't have to run overtime. But if I can't, I'm sure we want those facilities open come May. Realistically, I'll be assigning some overtime to it. But that's just the reality of what this winter's started to do to us.
Questions from board members? We'll go to Mrs. Cook-Littman.
Thank you. Just a quick question as a new board member. I'm just curious, this winter feels much worse to me than other winters, but I feel that way every winter. So I'm just curious how this compares to years past in terms of how over budget we are at this time of year.
Well, the last 3 years have been all severe. So this year we had the push later on. Last year we had the big push in January was a miserable month for us, and the year before was the Nemo-related storm. So hopefully these 3 years won't be the new, the new 3-year average. But yeah, the last 3 years have been over and above what we expect for storms. And just counting the event today, this was like the 15th event that we had that we got called out for and dedicated, more than a light effort to. And out of those, I think we did pretty good because we probably went over budget, and the snow budget is a accumulation of a bunch of different line items. So it's built in the budget, but there's not one section that says snow and ice. So we probably made it till sometime maybe about 7 to 10 days ago where we went over budget. But literally the Monday storms that we had, where we had one Monday and we had the following Monday, well, those type storms could literally be $100,000, $120,000, $140,000 easily. So it's hard to pick to determine what a status quo is, but it's definitely not the last 3 years.
You all set? Mr. Walsh?
So I know the hope is that you were hoping that the last 3 aren't going to be what's the new norm, but when you go into the budgeting season, are you starting to say we got to build this thing up because we've had 3 straight years of this?
We have those conversations, and for example, in the new budget, we're increasing the overtime line by $25,000 providing it doesn't get cut by other boards. And the point there is that we're going to do that for the next 3 years to up it to a total of $75,000. So right now it's at 125. The request on the table is at 150, and the hope is to fund that at 175 in the future budget and up to 200. And we think that will start to place us at more of our spending rate. And there are things, and I hate to be put on the spot, but my guys know I feel this way. These are all tough talking issues. We don't want to demoralize our workforce, but the reality is we pay a very hefty rate in our overtime, and we're trying to negotiate a lesser rate. But again, it doesn't make me any more popular sitting up here and guys threaten they're not going to come in. But the reality is, in the contract negotiations, we'll be seeking a movement towards favorable for us in terms of our cost.
Okay. In all the numbers, you said you might be coming back for more money for the snow stuff. What's the non-snow portion of the 325 approximately?
The two biggest drivers outside of snow are the UI, which is at $74,000. I'll do my best to explain it, but Ed Bowman told me that when the rate was set, there was then an approved UI increase that went into effect January 1st. So he believes the latter 6 months of this current budget are going to be up based on that increase. And that wasn't factored in when he had done the original numbers.
It wasn't factored into last year's budget that we
That is correct. That rate increase was not known at that time when he built the budget, correct.
And once again, the every time at this year, the utility bill is higher at the midway point, because not only do you have, July, August, and part of September for cooling, the June bill doesn't hit till this FY too, so.
And then what's the other component of the?
The other one is just the Buildings and Grounds Division, which is a pretty significant account, and it's basically everything you can imagine that you do at your own home in terms of electrical, painting, carpentry, whether it be small items or big items, and that's running at a pretty good clip.
How much over is that about?
We're estimating it's 31 as we speak, and that's not a second quarter number. That's a true 2.5 quarter number. That's also through mid-February. And I'm hoping that I can keep it in the 50 delta, so another 19 over.
Now, that's one that Scott and I are taking, obviously, a strong look at, going over every invoice. And Scott mentioned HVAC, but it's electrical, it's those type contractors, supplies, the Home Depot trips, and it's literally, death by 1,000 slashes. So, none of the bills are scary in and of themselves, but when you get a 500, a 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, they accumulate.
So my rough math on that, on those two items, you're about $100,000 to $120,000.
That's correct.
Of that, and
200 on snow.
Yeah, and that you'll believe that you're going to make at least the 100 to 120 up in your budget, which generally, to me, has been you take it out of paving.
Well,
It's always been your backstop.
yeah, I'm not a big fan of taking it out
I'm
of
not
paving.
either. I'm not either. Is that your plan again, or
No.
you don't know?
It definitely won't be my plan, because if anybody looks at the roads, the current condition of the roads based on the last 3 weeks, and the frost hasn't even left the ground, believe me, all your damage is going to occur when the frost leaves the ground, so I would prefer not to use that. Line items in terms of salary, we always try to, maintain a budget on those. So like right now, we're over in terms, we're under in terms of our regular payroll, so we will hopefully offset some overtime accounts with that. But snow would be, paving would be my last choice. I'll probably look at materials and other things if we're not too burdened there.
That's good to hear.
Now, obviously, paving's the biggest line item in this budget, but there are several line items, many line items which are 200,000, 300, 400,000. So not that there's any, fluff built into those, but we will look at each of those for opportunities.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Seeing none, thank you, gentlemen. I'm going to ask the Police Department. Assistant Chief Liddy's here. Good evening. Thank you for staying late. Take care, gentlemen. Good luck with the rest of the winter. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Sorry for the lateness of the hour.
Quite understandable.
So over by 125, Caitlin, this is a true overage as of December 31st, correct?
Yeah, through a conversation with Chief Liddy, yep.
Okay. Please go right ahead. Do you
Well,
want to?
just a clarification, the purpose of the exercise here, working with all the department heads with these numbers, is to both get where we are today, evaluate where we're going, and this theoretically is the best estimate of a total year.
Great. No, thank you very much.
The main driver in this overage right now is our vacancy situation. We had a rough 2 quarters in terms of vacancies. We've made great progress, and as of last week, we issued our last 2 conditional job offers, which will bring us to the true 108, a place we've never been before. We've had some long-term illnesses in the first 2 quarters. Some have been rectified, some have not. And we anticipate things getting better in the next couple weeks with some of the scenarios, but I also have 2, or at least 1 long-term that may not come back this entire year in terms of an illness. I would note that looking back historically, I was about at the same place last year financially, and with a little Yankee ingenuity, we were able to come in under budget, and we're hoping to do that.
This is the second year we've kind of seen this. Historically, previously, you guys were actually ran under pretty much, right? And it was last year the first time that we kind of saw it go over a bit, to your point.
At the second quarter.
At the second
Yeah.
quarter, and then you're at the same point now. Is that fair to say?
Pretty much the same point. So there is a great optimism that we'll be in the black this year.
Do we have questions on this right now? Yes, Mr. Mottola.
So if I understand, I may have missed what you said. So you're going to be at your staffing levels with these 2 new hires? Is that?
Correct, but I would like to take a moment to explain vacancies, because in the law enforcement world, a vacancy is much different than any other place.
Right.
When we hire someone, as an example, we offered conditional job offers, meaning they have to go through a whole process before they actually become salaried employees. But at the point that they do become salary employees, I don't see them for 11 months.
They're in training.
With all their training, and they don't actually fill a vacancy in my world for 11 months.
Sure.
Now, there are exceptions to that. Just a couple weeks ago, we hired 2 lateral transfers, which are certified police officers in other communities. That's a 6-week window for me, a much more pleasant scenario.
Okay. So do you do actual, when you hire officers, you do a testing process, or is it just through interviews? How do you do that?
Correct. We've done it in a couple different ways, but traditionally there's a written examination that takes place. We usually outsource that. That is followed by a first oral interview made up of internal people within our organization. At that point, a list is given to our Board of Police Commissioners, and they conduct a second interview, and they offer conditional job offers. Okay. At that point, the real testing begins with the psychological background investigations, polygraph investigations, medical exams, and things of that nature. So it is a kind of a long process.
Right. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Any other questions, comments, concerns on the police department budget as we move forward? Seeing none, Mr. Liddy, thank you.
Thank you,
Chief
Mr.
Liddy,
Flynn.
thank you very much. All right, we'll turn it back over to Ms. Spassi and Mr. Mayor. What else do we need to know about the finances as they
I have a
currently stand?
question about,
And we'll go back to Mr. Walsh, who's got a question.
Please, no.
now?
Do you have a question?
Yeah. In the all other departments, this would be savings for salaries and other things, anything else?
Now, the salaries is in that vacancy number,
Okay,
but that's everything other than vacancies.
okay.
And you can see some of, in my wording, on the expense
Yep.
variance report, you could kind of see where they all kind of fall out.
can add 'em
There's
all up.
probably, 75 or 80 accounts.
To the
So
first
the
selectman,
vacancy number shown there excludes, the only department it excludes is police, which shows in the police lane.
to the first selectman, when are we going to be hiring a conservation director? Because we've been out of that position for about, I guess we're on our 5th month.
We're nearing the end of the process. That is a
Okay.
process that goes through the Conservation Commission, as I
Okay.
believe you know.
It's just been taking them that long, it takes 5 months to hire a new director?
We went through an extensive process. We've got, I believe, over 40 applications in that had to get sorted through. There was an extensive process of interviewing to get that down to the final few. And then it's a decision that went from the committee back to the Conservation Commission. And to bring everybody together, it takes some time to do that.
Okay, thank you.
I got a question. Mr. Mayor, what, if anything, is keeping you up at night in terms of a concern over the finances right now that we should be aware of?
I mean, there's no real pressing issues other than trying to get the budget done.
And the one item that I see is maybe snow.
Well, I mean, it's you know, there's you know, it's a $300 million budget almost, and we're talking about, you know, being within you know, 1/3 of 1% of that on the positive side because of the revenue. You know, on the expenses side, you know, $200,000. One of the things that I know that the current first selectman has tried to do is be tight on everything. But it's going to be, I mean, the one item that could come back and bite us that is really volatile is the heart and hypertension, because we're looking at that as a favorable now. And you just get one bad case or one current case that goes bad.
Right.
And you can have again, that's all on a cash basis.
Right.
So you could get some big claims in there. Other than that, you know, things are steady as they go, kind of, so to
See,
speak.
I'm just trying to think of, I'm looking at not in relation to a $300 million budget. I'm looking in relation to kind of a $600,000 delta there.
Yeah.
Saying what could eat away at that. And the things that I see, right, heart and hypertension, snow, and then something goes wrong on the insurance side, the claim side, which we're monitoring on a
Yeah, it's I'm not as confident as Dr. Title was that we might have a good January. This is a very heavy flu season.
Right. Right. So those are the things that come to my mind. I didn't know if there was something
Yeah.
lurking.
Yeah, no, you're right on. The one, yeah, I mean, health is always, you know, volatile, but I would say the heart and hypertension would be the one that could jump up.
Okay. Mr. Matola, and then we'll go to Mr. Walsh.
And I obviously don't want you to get into any details, but we're self-insured, right, when it comes to liability?
Yeah, generally speaking, yes.
Okay, so-
I mean, for heart and hypertension, for workers' comp, for health care.
And if a public works driver runs somebody over, we're we don't have insurance coverage for that. We're self-insured as a town.
We have, like on some of our insurance, we have like $500,000 deductibles.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're not fully
Okay,
self-insured.
so we have, all right. I guess
And
my
we have
question-
like stop
my question
loss
is,
on
is
the
there,
other. Prime, mostly self-insured.
okay. And there's a stop loss.
Yeah.
My question generally is, if there's a claim where we think we could get hit in a certain year, obviously you take that into consideration. And
Yeah, Mr. Matola, one of the things we do during the budget season, when the lawyers are in here, is we'll go into private executive session.
Okay, that's fine.
And they'll update us on some of the cases and things like that, but we need to
Gotcha.
do it privately.
no, I understand that. Yeah, I just want to make sure there's a process.
But you're
Yeah.
you're absolutely correct. Those things happen.
Yeah, the one thing I'd add to that conversation is the legal, this document is general fund,
Right.
Correct.
and you'd have to go through, which we have here, I think, in the handouts, or was in the package, is the internal service fund document.
Correct.
And as of right now, and we went through an analysis of all known cases, tried to classify the timing, duration, et cetera, the Board of Finance last year, during the budget process, added $500,000 to the internal service fund, and the general liability right now is, I think our number is like 499 positive. So we're kind of running on budget. But
On this page.
and remember, this is like cash flow, so even a new case right now wouldn't impact this year, because a new case that's of any magnitude would not be paid out until some future fiscal year.
Thank you.
Mr. Stone?
Are we done with all the cases on the reassessment? Is that done?
No, that's,
those
so
are
that's a
still
number
out.
that Mr. Tetra was asking me for, actually, on the budget for this. Because if you remember last year, that was an issue. I kind of based it on the prior year, down a little bit, the prior couple of years, because I thought we were closer to the end of the revow period. And I had like 10 million in there, and I think it came up to like 19 million actual. So we're, trying to we're doing some analysis to try to come up with that, what number to put in there for this year's budget.
But are all the cases on the last revow, are they settled?
No, there's more cases. There's more settled. That's why I don't want, they're all settled, but yeah.
I know what the number is.
I know, yeah. But, and people, and there's, the new cases are, I think the cutoff date is February 20th. So we still, no. Is it February 20th? I think it's February 20th for the cutoff date, and then the Board of Assessment Appeals meets and hears cases through March 15th, and then they issue the rulings March 25th or something like that, and then I try to rush the information to the various boards, and then we try to evaluate how many are going to go to court. It's a process.
Mr. Tetra, did you have something to add?
No, the question you asked was the one I thought Mr. Stone had asked.
Any other questions?
Yes. To follow up on Mr. Flynn's, I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. So from the numbers that you have here today, the variances and things like that, you know of no potential variance at this point, other than that's been discussed here tonight, that you have, that's concerning you or whatever, that could impact this final 608 net estimated variance? A material one.
I have no knowledge of such a thing that I wouldn't talk about in public session.
Excuse me? What does that mean?
What it said.
Is there,
Go ahead. What does that
need an
mean?
executive session? Is that what we're talking about?
I don't know that,
I mean, we have a licensing audit going on.
Okay.
okay.
Okay. Other than that,
Right.
nothing stands out that's happened in the last 6 weeks from the end of December 31st, because we're halfway through.
You're
now,
making me think I've missed something, Jim.
I'm just asking.
No, there's, no.
Just like to be prepared.
Yeah, no, there's just, other than we will get, sometime in the near future, we will get the report on the licensing.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, any other topics that the board would like to address on the financial position of the town at this time? All right, thank you so much. Let's go to item number 7, our last and final item. To hear, consider, and act upon a request from the Chief Fiscal Officer to transfer $245,000 from contingency to various accounts per the attached schedule in the fiscal year 2015 for the Thea settlement. Go right ahead.
Again, I'd like to turn the floor over to the controller and clerk of the board.
This is as it says for the Thea settlement, and this would include any retro dollars that were paid out and then any change of salaries. The 15 budget book was, due to timing, had the 13 salaries in it. So in order to get them up to the 15, this number comes out of contingency as a budget transfer, because obviously the actuals are now higher than the budget for these people. So we need to transfer out of contingency $245,000 to the various departments, which is their salary and FICA.
And this will be properly reflected in the budget books when we get it later this month / early next month.
It's, the actuals are already there.
Okay.
So this is a budget-only
Got it.
transfer.
So, but for 2015, you're going to show,
This is in 15. I don't know the timing of if she, I'm not sure what the budget book would have in it. Is that an actual through, or is that a budget number? It probably would not
It's a
include that
budget.
because I think it's going to print as we speak, and this transfer has not been done yet.
Okay, so when we get the budget, we'll still be looking at, in the 2015 budget year, which we'll be comparing to, we'll still be looking at 2013 numbers. We're going to have the same problem we've had the last several years.
I think
when
there's
comparing
always a
budgets.
timing, but their 15 salaries are probably in there for the 16 budget book, because the salaries have been known since this settled
Okay,
in
can we just follow
December.
up on that? Let me know.
Yeah, no, the 16 budget is based upon, for Thea only.
I understand the 16 budget. I'm
The
talking
fifth,
about the 15
you're right, I know,
numbers
I'm
in
just
the book.
clarifying.
Oh, I'm
Right.
sorry. Yeah, I'm sure.
And
Yeah,
the
I'm just talking the 15 numbers that we'll be comparing to
the
say, oh,
15
this grew, right? We always know that we're like, oh, we can't look
Right.
at those salary numbers, that's a mess.
Yeah,
Right,
the
we
the
need-
15 budget is, from that perspective, will continue to be a mess.
Okay,
Yeah, I don't think there's any way around that with the timing.
because of the timing. Questions from anybody on this schedule and this transfer? Mr. Walsh?
How much is left in contingency?
Well, the budgeted contingency, I can just talk budget, is like
Well,
2.4 in the budget book.
And how much has been spent other than this now amount to be moved?
What's a balance sheet number on that, though, not what the budget?
I don't believe that we have used any of our normal budget.
Any of the normal?
Excuse me, normal contingency amount.
So this will be the.
We've used about
2.4
20,000 out of the 45, that's small contingency, but we've not used anything out of the,
Well, the assessor piece that was budgeted came out of there for the software or the assessment, the tax assessment,
came out of the
came out of contingency.
normal contingency?
Yeah,
What was that? How much was that?
428,000. That was budgeted,
Oh,
and
well,
that was
that was
approved, yeah.
budgeted, though.
Yeah.
Right, except
Can
for
we get a
that.
breakdown of where the contingency account, the total
Yeah.
contingency balance
Yeah.
stands, not just what was budgeted, but
Right.
because we've
There was
added to
three
that-
pieces.
There's all the salary stuff that's been added
That's
over
piece
like the
one,
last 3
then
years.
the assessors, year two, and then the normal, what I call, or we call the normal contingency is
If we
is
could get
three.
that so that we
And
know
I
what
don't
the
think
total
the
balance
normal
is.
has been touched.
Does that answer your question, Ms. Walsh? Any other questions? All right, actually, I screwed up. So can I have this item put before us? To hear, consider, and act upon a request from the Chief Fiscal Officer to transfer $245,000 from the contingency to the various accounts per the attached schedule in the 2015 fiscal year for the Thea settlement. Put before us by Mr. Brown, seconded by Mr. Mottola. The item is before us. Questions, comments, other discussion by board members? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That item carries. Before I'll accept the motion to adjourn, I want to recognize once again Caitlin, who's ending her term as our clerk tonight, before budget season, darn it. I want to thank her very much for all her hard work and effort. She's been a pleasure to work with. She's done a great job. She's a hard act to follow for our clerk contingent moving in, Mr. Mayor and Jennifer Carpenter. And I want to thank you, Caitlin. You'll be missed, and I hope you'll come back and visit us at times, particularly at the 11 o'clock hour for the budget meetings.
She'll be back at least quarterly.
Right, exactly. And as for the budget meetings, there's a history of people being assigned to bring snacks for our long budget meetings. I think Mr. Brown is in charge of assigning roles and responsibilities, so I'll ask him to get an email out to the various board members to assign that. You guys are in for a real treat during budget time. The rookies have to bring it the first time. The first time. No, they probably won't get utilized here. Anybody have anything else? Seeing none, once again, Caitlin, thank you and best wishes. And I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Brown, seconded. I'm going to take Mrs. Leclerc. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Good night, everybody.